The world is plagued with strange mysteries that range from alien encounters to archaeological enigmas. Often, these mysteries leave those who encounter them with an eerie feeling. It came past like a speeding jet and was said to be bigger than a standard Walmart. At least, this is what residents who live close to the Texas town of Stephenville have described. They expressed having spotted an object in the sky of January 2008. Many individuals, which included both a police officer and a pilot, had borne witness to a UFO that floated above the farming community for at least 5 minutes before disappearing into the night sky. The pilot, Stephen Allen, had seen the unidentified object while meeting with a few friends by a campfire. He described it as being incredibly large, with flashing strobe lights, and that it didn't make a sound, no engine noise, and no wind. He further detailed that the encounter was almost like a religious experience. The UAP reportedly sped off at over 3,000 miles per hour and was shortly followed by 2 F-16 fighter jets that were clearly outmaneuvered. Allen wondered if it was the War of the Worlds. The pilot stated that the aircraft had taken mere seconds to cross one piece of the sky, where it would take him 20 minutes in a Cessna. Allen believes that the UFO was about a half-mile wide and a mile long, making it longer than a Walmart. Written in the Stephenville Empire Tribune about the mysterious encounter, around 40 citizens saw the object, but some were too fearful to come forward about the sighting until others had done so first. The officer who bore witness to this was Officer Leroy Gayton, who recounted that he'd been approaching his car when he suddenly saw a red glow that reminded him of an erupting volcano. In his encounter, Lee explained that the object was floating 3,000 feet in the air, appearing orb-shaped, or something resembling a bubble. The 11 or 12 lights had been bright and pulsating or flashing before speeding off at an incredible speed, before being pursued by 2 jets, just as in Allen's experience. He quickly called for his son to view the sight as well. After this, the officer didn't speak much of the sighting until it appeared in the local newspaper. But the military were skeptical of this event. They passed it off as the resident allowing their imagination to run wild, and said that it was nothing more than an optical illusion. The officials explained the encounter away by saying that all they had seen was a reflection of sunlight on 2 nearby airliners. A nearby Air Force also supported this by saying none of their fighter jets had chased anything down that evening. This encounter had been rather similar to one that occurred at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. 12 United Airlines employees had seen an object that they would later file reports on. There were some varying descriptions of this UAP that seemed to fluctuate. Some believed that the object was an orb, while others had seen a 3-sided flying Dorito. Even with such different details, the Stephenville lights are considered to be among the most credible UAP sightings in the modern era. The Stephenville incident quickly became the talk of the town, and ultimately reached the Mutual UFO Network, which is a United States-based non-profit organization who are dedicated to researching UAPs all over the world. Once they caught wind of this story, they came to investigate. The organization had invited a few people to tell their stories, thinking that only a few individuals would come forward. But dozens of witness sightings appeared, and claimed to have seen these odd things in the sky in Stephenville. Not long after, television crews all the way from Japan to Brazil decided to descend on the town. While the Naval Air Station initially denied that any planes were in this area at the time, the military would soon change their statement and stated that there had been fighter jets who were involved in a training exercise and blamed their denial on miscommunication. Later, witnesses would claim that some members of the government had intimidated them into being silent about what they had seen. In addition, something unique comes up regarding this incident. The whole story seemed to be corroborated by nanotechnology engineer and UFO investigator Robert Powell, who had radar information falling in line with the sightings claimed by both Gayton and Allen. Through the Freedom of Information Act, Powell was able to obtain radar data from 5 antennas in the area from the FAA. It was with this that the investigator was able to track down the routes of the 2 F-16 fighter jets, which were equipped with transponders, since they were government aircraft. Once he was able to determine where the jets were, He could then start to look for objects that had no transponders, and what he found confirmed what both Lee and Allen had told him. There were 2 radar points showing a moving object that was not equipped with a transponder. According to Powell, the 2 points had matched up with the time of both Allen and Lee's encounters, as well as the geographical location as stated by Allen. The pilot had also drawn a picture of what he had seen, and had told an ABC News correspondent, Mike von Fremd, that he had seen an arch shape that converted into a vertical one before splitting and making 2 shapes before turning into fire and speeding off. Rick Sorrells was another one of the witnesses of this encounter. He explained that he was out in the woods, and when he looked at the trees, the object had been right there. Another witness, Claudette Odom, her husband, as well as 2 friends, had been clearing brush from a hilltop close to their house. They'd been on top of a hill with a visibility of over 20 miles in each direction. From the west side, Odom saw an object approaching in the darkness. He'd never seen something quite as fast and thought it was a missile or something similar. After the Air Force had denied that any of their jets had been in the area at that time, Odom thought something was amiss and stated, "I don't know what they're trying to cover up. We saw what we saw," ending with, "I knew they were fighter jets." One theory suggested that what each of the citizens had seen had actually been a jet, which they'd mistaken for an extraterrestrial visitor. The reporter at the Stephenville Empire Tribune, Angelia Joyner, who had broken the story, stated that none of the witnesses think that they had mistook the jets for a large object with dazzling lights. The Air Force's later admission that they did have F-16 jets, the same ones that witnesses described giving chase to the UFO, only supported the story of those who had seen it. Joyner went on to say that it only makes it seem as though something's going on. It had been the 6th of January, 1976, when Mona Stafford was celebrating her 36th birthday, along with her friends Louise Smith and Elaine Thomas. The trio decided to drive 35 miles from their Liberty, Kentucky home to the Redwoods restaurant for dinner. Redwoods is situated between Stanford and Lancaster. Louise had been the one driving in her '67 Chevy Nova. They would go on to have a pleasant dinner, and none of them consumed any intoxicating beverages. It was 45 minutes to midnight when they began to make their way home. Once they'd reached 9 miles out from Lancaster, they would take a turn off Highway 27 and onto Highway 78, heading toward Hustonville. However, it was just outside of Stanford that something incredibly strange took place. In the sky, a stray object appeared and was described as being bright and red. Mona Stafford initially thought that it must have been a plane that had been set ablaze, but this was not the case. As the curious light descended from the right-hand side of the road to an area ahead of the group, it became clear that there was no plane at all. It appeared that the object was larger than 2 houses. The massive object continued before stopping 100 yards ahead and took over both sides of the road. As stated by the women, it would rock back and forth for just a few seconds before moving to the left. Louise proceeded to drive, and they thought the craft had moved on. But as they drove for another quarter of a mile, a sudden blue light emitted through the rear window of the vehicle. At first, they had just assumed it was a highway patrol car with flashing lights, but would find that it was an odd object that had circles around and was coming up behind them. Louise would soon no longer have control of the car, and it had accelerated even though she'd taken her foot off the pedal. The speedometer flew up to 85 miles per hour. Mona had been in the passenger seat and tried to aid Louise in regaining control of the vehicle, but this proved an impossible task. It was stated that all 3 women began to feel a strange burning sensation in their eyes. The ignition lights suddenly lit up, indicating that the car's engine had stalled, but they continued to speed along down the road. As they continued, they would shortly come to a wide, brightly lit road, and only seconds later, this scene would become Highway 78. Mona, Louise, and Elaine would come to realize that they were now on the outskirts of Hustonville, 8 miles away from where they'd been only moments earlier. When they looked at the time, they discovered that an hour and 28 minutes had passed. At 1:25 in the morning, the trio would arrive at Louise's trailer in Liberty. The women hurried inside and tried to figure out what had just happened, and each had a red mark on the back of their necks along with irritated eyes. Louise went off into the bathroom, removed her watch, and proceeded to wash her face, but noted that the hands of the watch had been spinning at quite a speed. After splashing the water onto her face, she felt that the water had caused discomfort or pain in both her face and hands. The trio then headed next door to the home of Lowell Lee and expressed what they just experienced. There, he would have them sketch the object that they'd seen, and each of their drawings were incredibly similar, if not the same. The police were called, along with the local Navy office, but none of them appeared to show any interest in their story. In the days to come, Mona would continue to have problems with her eyes and sought medical assistance for conjunctivitis. Louise's parakeet became terrified of her, and had also experienced some electrical problems in her car. According to the reports, the Navy office had given the information about this story to the media, and it would soon appear in the newspapers. Jerry Black of MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, arranged an interview with these women. In addition to Jerry Black, J. Allen Hynek of the QFOS and Cora Lorenzen of APRO had also taken a look into the case. Initially, the women had refused any interviews, but Black was able to secure a meeting after much persistence of several telephone calls. The women would tell both Black and Peggy Schnell, another investigator, of the incredible details that surrounded their abductions. They had told the investigators of the effects the abduction had on their bodies, such as all three of them having lost weight, with Louise's parakeet becoming frightened when she wanted to touch it. She also recounted the electrical problems with her car, as well as her alarm clock no longer working after she touched it. These different UFO investigators would find that other witnesses had independently also reported a sighting of a UAP in Casey County and Lincoln County on the same evening as the occurrence involving the three women. Dr. R. Leo Sprinkle from the University of Wyoming had gotten word of the case and flew into the area. On the 7th of March in 1976, he would go on to perform a preliminary hypnotic regression on Mona, Louise, and Elaine. It was thereafter believed by investigators that the UFO had abducted the three. In July of that same year, James Young, a Lexington Police Department detective, would give each woman a separate lie detector test about their experience. They passed each of their tests with no issues. It was later that day that more hypnotic regression of the women was performed by Sprinkle. The sessions appeared to be similar to that of Betty and Barney Hill, and that the session would reveal that during the missing time that the women had experienced, they'd actually been taken aboard the object. Aboard the ship, they would undergo medical examinations carried out by shadow beings that would later resemble depictions of aliens. In these hypnotic sessions, all the women had described that they were scanned by the aliens and had instruments attached to their limbs. The aliens in question were described as shadow figures that had frightening eyes. According to the reports, the aliens didn't speak verbally, but rather communicated through telepathy. Strangely enough, the stories were corroborated by other witnesses. One farmer who owned the land where this abduction had taken place saw a flying aircraft of sorts emit a beam of light at a car. All three women appeared to have good reputations. Louise was 44, tall and thin, and she'd brought up her two children by herself and had two grandchildren thereafter. In her free time, she sketched, painted, and took up gospel singing. She was found to be a lifelong member of the Baptist Church and attended the services regularly. Mona was 36 and a former owner of an arts and crafts shop. At the time of the incident, she had been a secretary for her father's mobile trailer park. She's described as a Christian who attended the Hilltop Church of Christ. Elaine had been a 48-year-old housewife who was a Casey County resident. She and her husband had a daughter and 3 children. She too had been a lifelong churchgoer of the Contown Church of Christ. A Hindu temple, which is dedicated to Shiva, is said to be one of the largest temples in India, and is a clear example of the beautiful architecture that was present during its completion in 1010 AD. The temple celebrated its 1000th birthday in 2010, and has since become a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The temple stands in fortified walls that have been added during the 16th century. The temple tower, or Vimana, measures at 216 feet, or 66 meters high, and is one of the tallest in the world. The bulbous structure found on the top of the temple had been carved from a single rock weighing 80 tons. In addition to this, there's also a large statue of Nandi, the sacred bull, that's been carved from one single stone that measures at 16 feet or 4.9 meters long and 13 feet or 4 meters high. The temple is made entirely of granite, of which the nearest source is about 60 kilometers west of the building. The temple, like many, also holds some strange, alluring secrets and mysteries. The temple belonged to a lush city known as Tanjore, which was the capital of the Chola emperors around 1,000 years ago. While many investigations have been carried out regarding this temple and how it was constructed, it was never completely determined as to how the structure was built. One of the more well-known secrets that the temple keeps is its underground passages. It was found that it holds over 100 passages that lead to various locations, such as the King's Palace, other temples, areas of Tanjore, and other regions entirely. It was also found that some of these tunnels can lead to some dangerous places, and due to there being no map of the routes, all of them have been sealed off. Historians believe that the passages serve as a safety trap. Another famous mystery of the temple is that of the capstone, the aforementioned 80-ton stone. The technique used by the Cholans to transport this heavy stone to the site and then to the peak of the temple is unknown. The temple was constructed during a time when no machines, cable cars, or escalators were available. There have also been questions as to where the granite had come from, since there had not been any quarries nearby. After extensive searches were carried out by researchers, it was found that some of the stones were brought from 2,100 kilometers away. In addition, no one has been able to replicate the carvings of this temple to this day. A special method must have been used during that era in order to achieve the look that the civilization had created. Another marvel that relates to the mysterious temple is that of the towers. Strangely, its shadow does not cast upon the ground. It had been geometrically constructed in the most perfect sense and was found to have impeccable balance, withstanding natural conditions as well as political ones. Some have theorized that a shadow is not cast by the temple due to the way that the basements have been constructed. It's said that the basement of the structure absorbs the shadow of the megalithic temple. But some, however, have dismissed the shadow theory, stating that it's a mere illusion. It was said that due to its immense size, the shadow that it casts falls at a much greater distance, and no one can see it because the shadow falls upon the trees that are planted in the area. The highest tower was found to have a hollow shape where the stones interlock without a form of material that binds it. It's possible that due to the weight of the stones, it's aided in the tower's balance, leaving it standing even after 1,000 years of natural disasters. It's also been said that this tower is the center of the universe, as well as the axis of the world. Furthermore, there was also a set of small stairs discovered above the primary deity that led to the upper area of the tower. If the mantra Om is recited within this hollow space, the divine vibration is said to create an immortal experience. The city of Tanjore had red, fertile soil, and there was no trace of granite stones, which is strange since the entire temple was built from the strongest granites of the world. The method of transporting these pieces of granite by the ancient Cholas still remains a mystery. The sculptures, as well as the holes in the stones, appear to be much too intricate to have been created using copper or iron chisels, which the civilization had during this period. Mystery also surrounds the artwork of the temple, including paintings as well as statues. The high-quality artwork within the temple indicates the artistic excellence of this kingdom during this era. The colors used in the paintings are still vibrant and certainly do not look to be over 1,000 years old. The Nandi statue was made during the Rajaraja Cholan era and is said to have kept growing in size. It's been theorized that this could be due to the unique weather conditions that control the statue's growth. In order to control its growth, it will be kept indoors and nailed to the ground. The current statue, however, that resides at the temple is a single stone creation that was a gift from Maratha rulers during the 17th or 19th centuries. Just like any other ancient megalithic build, aliens were bound to come along. There are some theorists who've suggested that the temple was created by aliens, or that aliens assisted the civilization with means of knowledge to aid them in creating this immense structure. They believe it to be the works of extraterrestrials due to each of the mysteries as listed. From the granite slabs that appeared from nowhere to the lack of binding material holding it all together. It was possibly also the secret chambers hidden within the palace that aided in such theories. The chambers, of course, are off limits to tourists, but it said that some excellent acoustic techniques had been used during the making of such secret areas. This would allow for a messenger to relay a coded message through a whisper to 3 floors above. An official report was done on a strange incident that occurred on the 27th of January, 1977. Lee Parish, a 19-year-old, experienced something truly terrifying around 1:05 that morning. The investigators of this alien abduction case were 2 individuals named Don Elkins and Carla Ruckert, who'd been contacted by a hypnotist named Lawrence Allison, who'd worked with the 2 on UFO cases previously. It was stated that Lee's mother had contacted Lawrence after getting the sense that something had happened to her son the previous night. Lee, at the time, was a high school graduate and had a job working at his family's firm, Parish Supply, as a truck driver and worker. He was described as being 6 feet tall and husky with a polite manner. It appeared to the investigators that he was competent and within his right mind. The boy seemed to be genuinely upset by whatever had happened to him in the early hours of the morning. The occurrence had been in Prospect, Kentucky, when Lee was at his girlfriend Kathy's house. The boy decided to head out after the television show they'd been watching had just ended. Upon his departure, he'd fed the dog and got into his 1970 model Jeepster with a V6 engine. He began his 7-minute-long journey back home in weather that had been cold and cloudy, with some snow covering a bit of the ground. The roads, however, were clear, and there was no rain at the time. He'd been traveling west on Highway 329 and heading to US 42. Lee had been about 4 miles short of US 42 when he spotted an object. He'd initially seen this strange item gliding above the tree line, guessed to be about 100 to 220 feet off the ground at an altitude of 100 to 150 feet. Lee detailed that the UAP was at least 10 feet tall and 40 feet long and appeared as a perfect rectangle. The object was the color of the setting sun, but had been too bright to look at constantly. Soon, the boy would become rather scared or creeped out, and immediately wanted to leave the area, but he couldn't do so. Lee had expressed that he was not even sure how the car had remained on the road, because he was not driving it, and about 15 seconds into the encounter, the car radio failed. Lee carried on watching the UAP as it continued to hover until it was right above him. It then suddenly sped off at the speed of a jet to the northwest and didn't make a single sound. When he arrived back home, his mother met him at the door, asking what was wrong with his eyes. After he looked at himself in the mirror, Lee could see his eyes to be extremely red and irritated. He would then discover that the time was 1:45 in the morning, meaning that his route from Kathy's had taken 45 minutes instead of 7. His mother confirmed the time that he arrived home, and his girlfriend corroborated his departure. Initially, Lee had been rather anxious about the idea of being placed under hypnosis, but after Lawrence and Don had spoken to him about the techniques that he would experience, he began to feel reassured. Lawrence, the hypnotist, would spend about 40 minutes relaxing the subject in order to achieve the desired state. He would then proceed to subject Lee to several childhood ages before bringing him up to the time of the encounter. He was then prompted to speak of the story as it was happening to him. It had been an eerie case for the observer to have ventured through the sequence of events with the boy. Upon leaving Kathy's house, Lee had come to see the rectangular UAP. He detailed under hypnosis that he thought it was a fire at first, but would reject this hypothesis before immediately becoming scared. He would then ask himself continuously, "What is it?" He would express that his eyes were hurting due to the brightness of the object, but he was unable to look away. He recounted that it didn't appear as though the object was moving, but it had somehow found its way right above him. Lee would become increasingly more frightened and said, "It's not moving," in a confused tone. For a second, the craft would change from black and then to white, and soon he was no longer in his Jeep, but rather in a circular white room. He had no knowledge of this transition and how he ended up in this room. It was 20 feet in diameter and the ceiling reached 20 feet high. Before him, there stood 3 items, which he felt were sentient, even though they were not human. They'd been red, black, and white, the 3 colors of the craft. He believed that they were machines or creatures. The black one resembled something like a tombstone texture and stood quite tall. It had a singular pointed arm. The next was the white one, which had been wider and stood only at 6 feet. It had 2 unmoving appendages and a wedge-like head. It was known that this white figure had been the leader and would emit an odd sound like teeth being brushed. When he looked at the third, Lee saw that the red one had been the smallest and was rectangular shaped. He believed that this one had been scared of him as it approached and touched his forehead and above his ear. Upon this touch, Lee would feel a cold sensation and later thought that it had been some sort of analysis. The black entity had also touched Lee after moving slowly towards him, revealing a featureless head. It would proceed to make contact with Lee on his left side and his back, which had further terrified him. Throughout the hypnosis, it's alleged the boy continuously repeated, "No, no, not the black one." The black one would also cause a cold and burning sensation and would make him feel as though he was vibrating. During the entirety of the abduction, Lee felt cold and the ship had a boat on water motion, rocking back and forth. Later, more details would be presented regarding the white being, which was said to glow and sat in the middle of the room watching their abductee. The red one would then go with the white one by going behind it or sometimes merging with it. After the red one had completed its purpose, the white one would begin to emit a sound of sandpaper or a scraping noise. Lee now felt suddenly warm. The white one then went to the black one, either going behind it or merging, but Lee could no longer see both the white and red. He was then left alone and shortly after appeared back in his Jeep. Under the hypnotic state, there had been no transition from being in the room to the awareness of being back in his Jeep. Later, the investigators asked about the method of transport of the mechanism. Lee explained that the ship had caught his Jeep as one would expect from a mousetrap. The day after the sighting had taken place, the electrical system of the vehicle had gone faulty. The abductee would later express that he'd been somewhat interested in UFOs, and when he was in high school, read a book about UFOs, and had an interest in psychic phenomena. Lee explained that he'd previously experienced strange events, such as willing an outdoor light to turn on, even though it had been unplugged. Helen Smith was born on the 9th of December, 1861, and had grown to become a famous late 19th century medium. She'd become known as the muse of automatic writing by surrealists, who were said to have viewed her as evidence of the power of the surreal, as well as a symbol of surrealist knowledge. Later in her life, Smith would go on to claim that she had the ability to speak with Martians, and had been the reincarnation of both a Hindu princess as well as Marie Antoinette. Smith had been the child of a Hungarian merchant who worked as an employee in a commercial house. In 1891, she discovered spiritualism and joined the Spiritualist Development Circle. According to the believers, Smith had started to show evidence of medium abilities in 1892. Smith had also stated that she'd communicated with Victor Hugo and Cagliostro. Soon, the medium became famous in Geneva. Smith's channeling would evolve from the raps and table tipping to trances. When in this state, she would experience imagery of faraway places, including that of a civilization on Mars, as well as her alleged past lives. She would additionally write out the Martian words on paper, which she would later translate into French. In 1900, Smith would grow in her popularity after a publication called Des Indes à la Planète Mars was released by Theodore Flournoy, who'd become acquainted with Smith in Geneva. The publication, when translated, was titled From India to the Planet Mars. Theodore had been a professor of psychology at the University of Geneva, and he and Smith remained close up until 1899, before the publication was made. The book would go on to document her series of experiences in terms of romantic cycles, which included the Martian cycle, Ultra-Martian cycle, Hindu cycle, Oriental cycle, and the Royal cycle. It was in 1900 that an American spiritualist, Mrs. Jackson, who became impressed with Smith, would offer her a salary that permitted her to end her job and become dedicated to pursuing her own experiences. Smith had accepted this and was able to go forth with further cycles. She would then begin to paint the visions that she'd seen, as well as religious images of Christ. There were 3 main spirit stories relating to Smith that had been narrated in a serial form. The first had been that of a Hindu princess. According to the story, the medium was able to replicate the sense of an Oriental princess with the poses of a priestess, as well as singing melodies, and it even stretched across the sofa with the elegance of movements of a real princess. What was incredibly intriguing, though, was the Sanskrit in which Smith could write and speak, which is a language that she had very little knowledge of. Her writings would also present a couple of Arabic passages. The second story had the medium acting like an aristocratic lady who spoke French in the way that it had been spoken a century prior. This was believed to be the spirit of that of Marie Antoinette. It had been Smith's third most prominent story that was perhaps the most extraordinary, and that was of her journey to the planet Mars. It was stated in her Martian language that Smith had spoken of brilliant colors and of her flight to space. She then detailed a world that was very similar to that of Earth, but instead it was inhabited by disembodied spirits. She recounted carriages that would glide by without being pulled along by a horse or wheels. Houses on this land were equipped with fountains on the roofs, and men and women would dress almost the same. After various analysis by many different people had been done on the stories as told by Smith, one author, Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes novels, detailed a strange phenomenon that was known as automatic writing. He would describe a writer's creativity as a process that had been guided by the writer's subconscious or by the spirits of an external world, but like many others who had become intrigued by the occult and esoteric, could not come to a definite conclusion. Automatic writing was a well-observed practice among the esoteric people, such as mediums, who were believed to be in contact with the other world. They would arrange sittings and seances, ultimately grabbing the attention of the Society for Psychical Research that had been established in 1882 in London. Behavioral scientists would then travel around the world to study the methods that these mediums would make use of, and would attempt to find a rational explanation for these occult practices. While Smith was largely met with skepticism, no one could prove her claims as untrue. But it was stated that her stories had been that of fabrication, with some evidence to support such stories. But researchers such as Doyle believed her stories and came up with various theories, such as spirit embodiments, as well as visions of another world as a source of where Smith had gotten her information. In this day and age, it seems almost unthinkable for someone to leave their house without their phone, since it serves as a lifeline in case of an emergency, and can also be used to track someone who's gone missing. But there are many missing person cases where those searching for someone find their phone in their car, house, or apartment, leaving them with no way of attempting to contact them or to track them. In some of these cases, the missing person merely planned to step out for a few minutes before inexplicably disappearing, or they purposefully left their phone at home so that they couldn't be found, usually indicating that they wanted to start a new life somewhere else. Though there isn't much information about his case online, some sources state that missing 26-year-old man Kyler Charles Blaha from South Fulton, Georgia, left his phone at home as it's believed that his family still has it in their possession. Alarmingly, there seem to be very few clues in Kyler's disappearance, but it's known that he was present at his family's house between 3 and 4 p.m. on the 11th of October 2020, the day that he vanished. But at around that same time, he left the house, which is located at Wellesley Estate subdivision in South Fulton, on foot. But he failed to notify any of his family members where he was going, and hence there was no definitive starting point for searchers to begin looking for him. When he failed to return home later that evening, his family started to become concerned, and they filed a missing person report with the South Fulton Police Department. When he still didn't return home the following day, his family became convinced that something was wrong, but they had no idea where to start looking for him. Another known fact in this strange case is that Kyler was seen close to the Butner and Union Roads the day after he left his house, which is strange since he seemingly made no effort to contact his family or any of his friends. Investigators have stated that they don't believe any foul play was involved in Kyler's case, but they've also added that they have very few leads to follow up on, and hence they asked for members of the public to be on the lookout in case he was spotted. But no further leads came in. Kyler wasn't found, and he remains missing today, more than 3 years after he was reported missing. It's been suggested that Kyler may be suffering from depression, but this seems unlikely since he made a Facebook post just 4 months before his disappearance, in which he stated that although he'd been through a lot, he always managed to keep a smile on his face and that he loves his life. It should be noted that Kyler's Facebook profile is under the name Ray Stone, but it isn't certain whether he may be using that name as a pseudonym. His family has repeatedly posted to Facebook, asking anyone who may have seen him to come forward, but these efforts have been in vain so far. Kyler is described as having long, curly black hair, and that he sometimes wears braids. He wears a goatee, has brown eyes, stands around 5 foot 1 inches tall, and at the time that he went missing, weighed around 160 pounds. He can also be recognized by a tattoo sleeve on his right arm, and another tattoo of a skull on his right forearm. The last time he was seen, Kyler was wearing gray jeans and a white t-shirt. If you have any information on Kyler's whereabouts, you're asked to contact the South Fulton Police Department at 470-809-7300 or Crime Stoppers of Atlanta tip line at 404-577-8477. Kyler's nameless case number is MP92119. The legend of Spring-Heeled Jack is one that's been spoken about for over a century, and even today there's no explanation for what people in England experienced between 1837 and 1986, though there are even some reports that have been cited as recently as 2012. The first sighting of the figure, which many people describe as either a devil or a phantom, was in London in 1837, when people started reporting seeing a ghostly or impish figure bounding through the streets at night, and even having the ability to leap from the street onto rooftops with little effort. Some people report hearing their doorbells ring, and when they answered the door, they were met by a visage of Spring-Heeled Jack, who then tore at their clothes with damp claws before fleeing at inhuman speed. In other cases, he would hide in shrubs by the roadside and wait for unsuspecting pedestrians to pass by before leaping out into the open to carry out another attack, and then disappearing into the darkness of night. In one of Jack's most famous attacks, a woman named Jane Alsop was in her house one evening when her doorbell rang. At the same time, she heard a man yelling that they'd captured the Phantom and that they needed more people to help restrain him. She rushed to the door with a candle in hand, hoping to hand it to the man so that he could see in the darkness. But when she opened the door and walked into the street to find him, she was beset by Jack, who used his claws to tear at her clothing. She tried to run back into the house, but the figure followed her with blue flames emanating from its mouth, as she was certain that he would catch up to her until her sister intervened and managed to scare him away. When the attack was over, she described the figure as dressed in all white, tight-fitting clothing, and added that he had red, glowing eyes that frightened her beyond belief, and it wouldn't take long before he struck again. Just a few days after Jane's ordeal, a woman named Lucy Scales was out on an evening stroll with her sister when a figure jumped out at them and blew blue flames into Lucy's face, which caused her to collapse and have a seizure, but she was left unharmed otherwise. Mary Stevens was also one of Jack's victims, as she encountered the strange phenomenon while she was walking across Clapham Common on her way home. Jack jumped out from the foliage and suddenly kissed her face before also clawing at her clothes. Her screams were heard by a group of people passing by, and they rushed to her aid, scaring the figure off. Despite several similar incidents being reported, though, her story was seen as mere hysteria, despite her being known as a sensible person. In another incident, the shadowy figure suddenly appeared in front of a carriage, scaring the driver before reportedly effortlessly jumping over a 9-foot wall. Witnesses in that incident described hearing the Phantom screeching as he fled, and that it sent shivers down their spines. But soon, the attacks spread outside of London, with people reporting similar attacks by a dark, slender, devil-like figure in Midlands, Devon, and at the Aldershot military base, which is located in Hampshire. Several people were accused of being Spring-Heeled Jack, including Thomas Milbank, who came forward to claim that he was the one carrying out the attacks, but he was never convicted since he was unable to prove that he could breathe fire. The Marquess of Waterford also faced accusations that he was the Phantom, since he was known to have a bad reputation among women in the area, as well as certain members of the police force, but there was no way of proving these allegations. At one point, people speculated that it was an elaborate prank being carried out by a group of young men who dared one of their friends to dress up like the figure, but again, they were set free due to a lack of evidence. While most people consider Spring-Heeled Jack to be a figment of the imagination, many others are adamant that they saw him with their own eyes, but he was never caught, and his legend lives on in the stories that are told about him today. Imagine stumbling across a massive amount of money and then being told that you can keep it. Most of us have dreams of striking such luck one day, and while most of us never will unless we win the lottery, one man in New Zealand couldn't believe his luck while he was simply doing his job one day. In August of 2011, Chamandu Amarasinghe, who was studying in New Zealand at the time, was at his job as a cleaner at the Channel 9 news station when he entered the men's bathroom to start cleaning it. While carrying out his duties, he noticed that there seemed to be something sticking out from one of the sanitary bins that were placed in the bathroom. And when he opened it to take a closer look, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Someone had stuffed a large amount of $150 bills into the bin, and he quickly realized that there was more than he thought, as he was unable to count it all. This would cause most of us to have a moral dilemma as to whether we should keep the money for ourselves or turn it in to the authorities. But Amarasinghe didn't have to think twice, as he immediately decided to notify someone of his discovery. He would later state that he thought someone must be playing a prank on him, but as soon as he touched the money, he knew it was real. He called his supervisor, who was just as shocked by the discovery, and he then notified the police. Once they searched the rest of the bathroom, they realized that more bills had been flushed down the toilet, and they called for a plumber. He would then pull a further $1,200 from the toilet's pipes, bringing the total left in the bathroom to $100,000, an unbelievable amount of money to just leave behind in a bathroom that's used by many people every day. No one ever came forward to claim the money, though investigators were able to acquire CCTV footage showing a man entering the building while carrying 2 large bags, and he could be seen leaving again about 5 hours later, though some sources state that he was in the building for 4. A man named Emerald Nguyen was arrested after it was thought that he might be the man in the footage, but he was released after he stated that he had no memory of either having the money on him at any point or abandoning it, since he was under the influence of illegal substances. Since no one else laid claim to the money, a magistrate ruled that Amarasinghe could keep $81,597 of the $100,000, since he'd been very honest about finding it, and Amarasinghe stated that he would be putting it to good use. Whether Nguyen really was responsible for dumping the money remains unclear, and we'll likely never know who the money really belonged to. The Georgia Guidestones were erected in 1980 and were meant to serve as a guide to an age of reason. Their tale begins in 1978 when a man using a fake name of R.C. Christian informed the Elberton Granite Finishing Company that a group that he belonged to had the idea for the monument's creation, and that they would like the company to construct it no matter the cost. But he did insist that his real name nor the name of the group never be revealed, and added that once the project was complete, all the plans for its construction be destroyed in absolute secrecy. The company agreed to his terms, and the following year, construction of the stones was completed. The first stone contained an inscription reading, "Let these be guide stones to an age of reason." The rest of the stones also contained inscriptions in 8 languages, including English, Spanish, Swahili, Hindu, Hebrew, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian, and were meant as a guide to rebuild the planet after an apocalyptic event. It suggested that the world's population be kept under 500 million, so that humanity and nature could remain in balance. It also revealed each day's date at noon every day, as the sun shone through a hole in one of the stones, onto a calendar that was carved into another. One of the tablets stated that a time capsule had been buried under the monument, but it didn't contain the date when it was buried, or when it was supposed to be opened, and subsequent investigations have revealed that there was no capsule to be found. But not everyone welcomed the stones. Some people thought that they were placed there by a satanic group, or that it had something to do with the New World Order, and as a result they were often targeted by vandals. But one man in particular seemingly took serious exception to the stones and their message, as he decided to destroy them himself. On the morning of the 6th of July, 2022, he placed an explosive device on the monument and drove away before it detonated. Luckily, no one was nearby and no one was injured. CCTV footage shows the man leaving the scene in a silver sedan, and also captured the moment when the device went off. While some of the stones were either destroyed or badly damaged, others remained intact, but they were removed to prevent any further incidents, and for the safety of the surrounding community. This hasn't stopped people from all over the country traveling to the site where the monument once stood, as they can be regularly seen collecting some of the remaining gravel as a souvenir of the strange and polarizing stones that were once known as America's Stonehenge. Former governor candidate Candace Taylor stated after the incident that she believed God destroyed the stones and that she was glad it happened, since she once publicly vowed to have them turned to dust. But she did feel that if vandals were responsible for the destruction, they should face the full consequences for their actions, since they would have acted outside the law. Since the stones were considered to be the property of the county, they were classified as a public building, and if the person responsible for their destruction is ever identified, they could face up to 20 years in prison. But for now, their identity remains an unsolved mystery. When someone goes missing, the days following their disappearance must be agony for those looking for them. But sometimes there's no progress in their case for weeks. These sometimes turn into months and eventually years without any new information being found, and all anyone can do is hope that they'll return home one day. This is exactly what happened in the case of 22-year-old Damian Sharp from Warren in Pennsylvania, who's been missing for 22 years. And since there have been no new leads in his case, he's been declared legally deceased despite his family having no clue what may have happened to him. After graduating from Warren Area High School, Damian enlisted in the military and served in Bosnia with the 10th Mountain Division. Following his military service, he returned home to Warren, where he rented an apartment along with a few roommates. It should be noted that at the time of his disappearance, Damian was using metal crutches to walk, since he'd sustained a knee injury at an indoor skate park where his brother was employed. On the evening before his disappearance, the 24th of May, 2002, he and his roommates hosted a party at their apartment, and the following day, he and a few of his friends drove around town in a female friend's car. Later that day, he returned to the skate park where he met up with his brother, since they had plans to attend a party in a local wooded area about a mile from the nearest road that night. But since Damian was still relying on his crutches, he would find the going tough, and so they decided to host the party at his apartment instead. That afternoon, he was in the company of a friend who then dropped him off at the corner of Prospect and Doll Street, where he met up with another friend and they went to the friend's apartment, which was situated on Prospect Street. The two spent some time together, and Damian left at around 6 p.m. after making plans to meet his friend later that evening for the party. But he never showed up, and he's not been seen since. No one was notified about Damian's disappearance until his roommates contacted his family on the 1st of June, a full week after he was last seen. When he still hadn't been found by the 3rd, his mother decided to file a missing person report, notifying them that they'd been unable to make contact with him. Several searches were carried out of the surrounding wooded areas, since they're known to be popular among campers, but it isn't known if any clues were found, as the details of the land and water searches have not been made available to the public. His case was upgraded from a missing person investigation to a homicide case after investigators announced that they'd uncovered suspicious circumstances during their investigation. But again, what these details are is unclear. One person did come forward to state that they believed Damian's life had been ended over illegal substances, but this tip didn't seem to make any difference, as no further progress was made and Damian has never been found. He's described as having strawberry blonde hair and hazel eyes. He stands between 5'7" and 5'8" inches tall and weighed around 170 pounds when he disappeared. He has a tattoo of an Egyptian ankh on his chest and was last seen wearing dark-colored shorts and a dark shirt. He also had a black backpack with him. Anyone with information on this case is asked to contact the Warren Police Department at 814-723-2700, quoting agency case number 2002-2640. Greenock is a town situated on the coast of Scotland near Glasgow, and since the 1970s, its residents have spoken about a man that they call the Catman of Greenock, an elusive figure who was thought by some to be nothing more than a myth. Though many people have reported sightings of the Catman, no one has ever been able to identify him. He's never spoken to anyone crossing his path, and since he's said to lurk in the dark shadows of alleyways, he isn't easily spotted. Those who claim to have had encounters with him state that he crawls along the ground on his belly, and that he stays alive by eating rats that he finds in the alleys. but not everyone is convinced that he really exists, since these are some very outlandish claims. Those who have seen him have speculated that he might be a Russian sailor that somehow became lost and ended up in Scotland in the 1970s, while others think that he may just be a man who's suffering from a mental condition and that he escaped from a local mental health facility a long time ago. The man got his moniker because of his preferred habitat, alleyways where he can easily stay out of sight and where he can catch rats with ease. It's even been suggested that he retreats underground during the day to stay out of sight. One Reddit user claims to have met the Catman and stated that he's actually completely harmless, but he still found it strange that he's been sighted in the area for decades, and he apparently disappeared for a few years before being seen again in 2007. Then there's the theory that the man was somehow injured decades ago, and as a result lost the use of his legs, which is why he had to resort to crawling around on the ground while hunting for his prey. Despite never approaching or hurting anyone, the Catman has gained a reputation for being creepy, since his face is always covered in soot, and some witnesses describe seeing his eyes reflect in the light the same way that a cat's would. When a video of the man emerged online in 2007, the legend of the Catman was renewed once more, and it said that he was taken to a mental hospital for treatment, but those who believe this theory say he was unable to adjust to life in the facility, and so he escaped back to the alleyways. Whether the man captured in the video is the same person said to have crawled around the alleyways in Greenock during the 70s remains unknown, but whatever the case may be, this is a mystery that's begging to be solved. Since the man in the video is now confirmed to exist, it may just be possible to identify him one day and to finally put the mystery to rest, since he may be able to tell the authorities who he is and whether he's been living in these alleys since the 70s. But for now, all we can do is speculate, and the one certain thing is that the Catman of Greenock's legend is still very much alive. Being stalked by an unknown person must be a terrifying experience, since they could be lurking around any corner at any given time, or watching you without your knowledge. It's a massive invasion of privacy and must be a truly unnerving event, as is evidenced by a case that occurred in 1950. The case is known as the Louisiana Phantom Whistler, and it involves an 18-year-old woman called Jacqueline Caddo, who was living in St. Charles Parish with her mother at the time. At first, the incidents seemed more confusing than alarming, as Jacqueline became aware that someone was making strange wolf whistles outside her window some nights. But it seemed harmless, and so she managed to ignore it. But just a short while later, the house was broken into, and she became concerned that it might be the work of the Whistler, whose identity remained a mystery, since he always seemed to be hidden by bushes wherever he was heard. Still, no harm was done, and Jacqueline carried on with her life, announcing that she would be getting married to a state trooper named Herbert Belsom. This seemed to draw the ire of the Whistler, as the activity suddenly started to escalate. The whistles had now changed from wolf whistles to a funeral dirge, which seemed even more ominous, and they had an added unnerving aspect, a howling screech or a moan as the whistles ended. Jacqueline's family started to fear for her safety and that she might be in danger, as the Whistler now seemed to appear below her window more often, and soon the situation became even worse when the Whistler started calling the house phone. When it was answered, a man stated that if Jacqueline went through with her plans to marry Belsom, he would end her life. News of the Whistler started to spread, and before long, news outlets started reporting on the strange incidents. One reporter traveled to the family's house for an interview with Jacqueline, and while there, she, Jacqueline, and two other members of her family heard the haunting whistles, causing Jacqueline to have a nervous breakdown. On another occasion, Jacqueline and her mother heard the same strange sound, and her mother decided to run to the window to catch the man in the act, but she was just too late, as she was only able to catch a glimpse of him as he fled. She described him as having matted hair and a stocky build, but she was unable to identify him. The police conducted a thorough investigation and scoured the property for any clues, but they were unable to find anything that could reveal the Whistler's identity. Unable to stand the tension any longer, Jacqueline decided to stay with Belsom's parents for a while, but her mother reported that the man made another call to the house, in which he told her that he knew exactly where Jacqueline was. The man was clearly adamant to stop the wedding, but he ultimately failed, and the couple married despite fears that the Whistler may carry out some sort of attack on the day. The day went off without a hitch, and the strange whistles were never heard again, leaving an entire town wondering who the Phantom Whistler was. A local sheriff had been convinced that it was all a hoax carried out by Jacqueline and her family, but after the wedding had taken place, he revealed he managed to track the culprit down, but refused to divulge any more information, since he believed it would cause embarrassment to the people involved. Some people believe the stalking was paranormal in nature, but it's far more likely that Jacqueline was being followed by someone who had unrequited feelings for her, and that they couldn't stand the thought of her marrying another man. Growing up in Illinois and Milwaukee, Alexander Kook had dreams of becoming a pro baseball player, specifically a right-handed pitcher. But these dreams never became a reality, and he started becoming involved with the wrong people while attending high school. His family attempted to help him by booking him into a rehabilitation facility, but this didn't seem to help, as he returned to his old ways once he was released. He finished high school and then attended the University of Wisconsin and Milwaukee Area Technical College, where he studied computer numerical control programming. Following this, he got a job as a welder and was living with friends in West Finn Place in Milwaukee. He was known to be in regular contact with his family, and so they found it worrisome that they couldn't contact him after the 6th of August in 2020. Fearing that something may have happened to him, they reported him as missing with the Milwaukee Police Department, who then started an investigation, but he's never been located. Alexander's family believes that at the time that he went missing, his mental health had been steadily declining, and that this may have something to do with his sudden and unexpected disappearance. But a few of his friends came forward to state that he told him he met a woman online. He added that he was thinking about going to Texas and Mexico to see her, and they tried to convince him that this was a bad idea. It isn't known whether he followed through with these plans, though. He'd also mentioned that he was planning on taking a Greyhound bus to California, since he'd heard about a way to make some money, but he never revealed what this entailed, and again, it isn't known whether he ever did so. There have been many reports of Alexander being seen with an unknown woman, as he was witnessed by one of his family members and some of his friends who reported that they'd met her on several occasions. They never learned the woman's name, but stated that she drove a white Nissan sedan or a maroon Nissan Murano. All that's known about the mysterious woman is that she used to drive Alexander around and sometimes bought him lunch. No further information was ever uncovered in this case, and the Milwaukee Police Department has asked anyone with any idea where Alexander may be to contact them at 414-933-4444. He's described as having black hair, brown eyes, standing 6 feet tall and weighing 175 pounds. He was last seen wearing a black hoodie, a red flannel shirt, and blue jeans with white shoes. Alexander's NamUs case number is MP79246. The Enfield Monster, also referred to as the Enfield Horror, is a creature that's been spoken about in Enfield, Illinois since the early 1970s, and its existence is still being debated by people in the area in modern times. The legend originated on the 25th of April, 1973, when a man named Henry McDaniel saw something outside his house that he couldn't identify, and so he grabbed his firearm and headed outside. Here, he came face to face with a creature that was standing between two of his rose bushes. At first, he thought it was a bear, but when he looked closer, he was shocked to find that it was something he'd never seen before. He would later state that the creature had 3 legs and 2 short arms, and although it had a very short torso, it almost seemed human. He added that it stood around 4.5 feet tall, and that it had a grayish color and huge pink eyes. Fearing for his life, McDaniel fired at the creature 4 times, hitting it once, and he reported that this caused it to let out a hiss similar to that of a wildcat. It then turned and fled, covering a distance of 50 feet in just 3 leaps. An investigation revealed strange footprints outside the house that were described as dog-like, since they each had 6 toe pads. McDaniel's 10-year-old neighbor then revealed that he'd also seen the creature about half an hour before the incident, and that it stepped on his foot, shredding his shoe in the process, though he would later recant this story. Speculation ran rife, with some people suggesting that the creature was a kangaroo that had escaped from a zoo, or that it was some kind of wild ape. But McDaniel laughed these suggestions off and claimed that the creature would return with more of its kind one day, adding that he believed they came from another planet. 2 weeks later, McDaniel saw the creature again, and a news crew traveled to the area to look for it. They managed to catch a glimpse of an ape-like creature near a set of train tracks close to McDaniel's house, but they fired at it and it fled. When a group of men went out looking for the monster, they happened upon it in the woods, adding that it had some type of fur. They also fired at it but failed to hit it, and they were eventually charged with hunting violations, since the sheriff believed they were merely raising hell. This was the last reported sighting of the creature, and it isn't known what became of it, or whether it ever truly existed. It's been suggested that McDaniel's report was greatly exaggerated, and the people in the area quickly latched onto his story in a fit of collective hysteria. But many people still living in the area insist that the Enfield Monster was real, and that it either eventually died or chose to move to a different, less populated area, where it wouldn't encounter as many people. The disappearance of 18-year-old Tammy Leppard, which occurred in 1983, is one full of strange details that have left investigators baffled, since she vanished and still remains missing to this day. Tammy was an avid beauty queen who'd participated in over 300 pageants by the time she was 16 years old. Of those, she emerged victorious an impressive 280 times, and it came as no surprise then that she decided to try her hand at being an actress as soon as she could. She landed her first role in 1982 when she got a part in the film Spring Break, but it seems that something untoward happened to her during that time. When filming for the movie was done, she went to an out-of-town party, and when she returned, she seemed like a different person. She'd always been bubbly and wore a smile on her face, but now she seemed distant and distracted. Whenever she was asked what was bothering her, she would either change the subject or claim that she was fine, though it was clear to those around her that she wasn't. Then one day, something strange happened at the family's house. The phone rang, and Wing Flanagan, a client of her mother, Linda, went to answer the door, but before she could, Tammy told him to say that she wasn't there. When he answered, the caller asked for Tammy, and he did as she asked, but the conversation was overheard by Linda. She then asked Tammy what this was all about, and told her mother that she'd seen something awful that she was not supposed to see, and that someone was coming after her, but she refused to divulge any details, despite her mother urging her to. Following this, Tammy's behavior became even more alarming, as she seemed to become even quieter and spent most of her time alone in the house. At one point, she stated that she was certain someone was watching her from her neighbor's new van, since it had tinted windows and she couldn't be convinced otherwise. Then, Tammy had the chance to star in the now popular movie Scarface, and she accepted the role. She stayed with a family friend, and it seemed that she started to move past her troubles, but on the fourth day of filming, she watched a scene being filmed in which one of the characters was hit after being fired at with a firearm. This had a profound impact on her, and she had a complete breakdown. She became hysterical and started talking about money laundering, added that she needed to hide since someone was after her. She had no choice but to abandon her role, and she returned home. But here, her paranoia got even worse. On one occasion, she left the house after getting into an argument with Wing, but she immediately tried to get back in. Finding that the door had been locked behind her, she started pounding on it and then grabbed a baseball bat, which she used to smash one of the windows. Linda became even more concerned than ever and checked Tammy into the Brevard County Mental Health Center so that her mental health could be checked. After a 22-hour stay, she was released, and the next day, she accompanied her best friend, Rick Adams, to church, where they prayed while Tammy cried uncontrollably. She told him that she may be going away for a while. The next day, she was picked up by another friend, Keith Roberts, to go to the beach, but they got into an argument, and Tammy asked to be dropped off in Cocoa Beach at the Glass Bank Building's parking lot. Thereafter, she tried to contact her aunt and another of her friends, but her aunt was out of town and her friend missed her call. She was never seen again. There have been multiple suspects in Tammy's case, including serial killers Christopher Wilder and John Crutchley, but no one was ever arrested, and her case remains unsolved. 28-year-old Devontae Marquez Richardson was described by family and friends as a man with a big heart who poured his soul into everything he did. Whether Devontae was working a 9-to-5 or pursuing his dream, he was determined to be the best. In 2020, Devontae's family noticed a change in him, and it wasn't for the better. He began exhibiting odd behavior that they were able to pass off at first. That was until he mysteriously vanished after telling a friend that he was going to help Kanye West. On June 9, 1992, Devante entered the world. He and his mother lived in Washington, D.C., surrounded by loving friends and family. In 2003, when Devante was 11 years old, he temporarily moved to Missouri to be with his father. He continued to flourish academically, even with a change of school and environment, and in 2010 he graduated from high school. Little is known about his time in high school or his time in Missouri with his father, but after graduating, Devante attended at Lincoln University in Missouri for a few semesters, but it didn't end up working out. He decided to leave Missouri and return to his mother in Mississippi Avenue in Washington, D.C. In D.C., Devante worked a traditional job during the day and pursued his passions by night. According to his Facebook page, Devante, who went by the name D. Rich, was the CEO of Big Blues Studio, a company that offered graphic design and other services to those who work in the music industry. Devante dreamed of becoming a music producer and working with local artists to help kickstart their careers. Devante also worked as a tattoo artist, taking clients in his spare time. By 2020, Devante was 28 years old and was beginning to see the fruits of his labor. At this time, he was a manager at a local grocery store and felt that he had a secure career. Unfortunately, 2020 and the preceding years would prove to be tough for business, big and small, as the world would come to a standstill. Devante lost his job as the store was forced to close. This left him feeling hopeless and depressed. According to his aunt, Marquita Richardson, Devante took a job with Uber to try to gain an income, but this venture didn't last. By July of 2020, Devante and the entire world felt lost. Everything had changed within the blink of an eye, and people were forced to rearrange their lives and find new solutions. While the weight of the world rested on his shoulders, Devante maintained a bright outlook. When visiting friends and family, they noticed that something was upsetting or bothering Devante, but chalked this up to the loss of his job. Then, on July 20th, 2020, something bizarre happened. At around 11 p.m. that evening, Devante left his home in his blue 2016 Jeep Compass. His mother assumed he was going to visit friends, but the truth would be far darker than that. Marquita, Devante's aunt, commented to the Great Bull Standard that they didn't realize Devante was missing until July 22nd. Upon realizing he was missing, they immediately reported this to the DC Metropolitan Police Department. The search for Devante would begin, and that's when they discovered his last communications. In an unsettling text sent to a friend on July 20th, Devante said he was headed to Cody, Wyoming, over 2,000 miles from Washington, D.C. The real reason for his visit was to meet with Kanye West, who has a ranch in the Big Horns. Devante had not expressed this to his family, and this clue would send the case into a tailspin. Investigators later discovered Devante's YouTube account, with videos that have now been removed, where he states that he and Kanye need to talk. His family believed that Devante may have been trying to jumpstart his music career by connecting with one of the biggest producers in the industry. On July 27th, the case took another turn when a blue 2016 Jeep Compass was discovered abandoned on a dirt road 8 miles from Grable, Wyoming. For 2 days, the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office attempted to trace the owner, to no avail. On July 29th, the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office ran the license plate through their databases and discovered that it belonged to Devante. After digging into his file, they discovered that his family had reported him missing from Washington, D.C. days earlier. The Bighorn Police Department contacted D.C., and a cross-country investigation began. Inside the car, investigators found Devante's laptop, keys, and 2 phones. Bighorn Sheriff Ken Blackburn immediately spotted several red flags when he processed the car. Talking to the Cowboy State Daily, he said, quote, "The car itself didn't present any evidence of somebody driving straight through across the United States. It was very clean and well kept. There was an absence of fast food wrappers and those types of things that would build up during a sustained road trip." As evidence had taken them across state lines, both parties agreed to get the FBI involved in the investigation. Following the discovery of Devante's car, the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office and FBI office searched the remote wilderness by horseback, foot, and utilized drones and helicopters. Canine units were also brought to the scene but were unable to find Devante's scent. Kanye West's team were also contacted, and they confirmed that Kanye did not have any contact with Devontae in July of 2020. Devontae had never met Kanye West, so it's unclear why he referred to him as his buddy. Investigators noted that Devontae's car was found around 20 miles from Kanye's property, in the Big Horns, but it doesn't appear that Devontae ever made it there. Reports don't indicate that Devontae's car was broken into or damaged, and the reason for its abandonment remains a mystery. Marquita Richardson, Devontae's aunt, told the police that he had no history of mental illness or run-ins with the law. He was a quiet and hard-working young man who desperately wanted to make it in the music business. Since 2020, multiple searches have been carried out, but the Wyoming wilderness is expansive, and investigators have been unable to find any sign of him. Devontae didn't know anybody in Wyoming, apart from knowing about Kanye's ranch. Shortly after Devontae's disappearance reached local news, a witness came forward with a possible sighting. On July 26th, they saw a man that looked like Devontae at a gas station 150 miles from Graybull, where his car was found. The witness claimed that Devontae got into the passenger seat of a white Jeep that was being driven by a white female. The Big Horns County Sheriff's Department jumped on this lead, but it proved to be a dead end. In the years since Devontae's disappearance, Sheriff Ken Blackburn told the media that they had investigated hundreds of reported sightings. These sightings came from the Yellowstone National Park southeast and west into South Dakota and several other places. Unfortunately, like the previous sighting, these panned out to nothing. Almost 4 years later, Devontae remains missing, and the circumstances of his disappearance remain a mystery. Devontae Marquez Richardson is described as a black male with black hair, brown eyes, 6'1" and 170 pounds. He has tattoos on both arms, his left hand, and the word blue across his knuckles. Anyone with information is asked to contact Ashley Rogers of the DC Metropolitan Police Department at 202-576-6768, quoting case number 20107-444, or FBI's VICAP at 800-634-4097. 30-year-old Tracy Pittman was described as a bright and energetic woman by the residents of the small town of Wetumpka, Alabama. Tracy's loved ones described her as a person who always put others first and strived to take care of everyone. In 1998, Tracy's life was on an upswing. She was about to start a new job, and her personal life had been ridden of chaos. That was until one evening in April of 1998. This night would change the lives of Tracy's family and the residents of Wetumpka forever. On March 15, 1968, Stephen and Linda Pittman welcomed their daughter Tracy Pittman into the world. The family resided in Montgomery, Alabama, and by all accounts, Tracy enjoyed a happy and healthy upbringing. She did well in school and would go on to seek further education and training. In the early 1990s, Tracy's life changed when she met Greg Kegley. The two instantly hit it off, and in 1993, the pair married. The first few years of their marriage were filled with bliss and harmony. In 1995, Tracy discovered she was pregnant with Greg, sharing her joy and excitement. By 96, Tracy and Greg welcomed their daughter, Peyton, into the world. The two found themselves surrounded by the usual stresses of parenthood, which put their relationship to the test. In 1997, a year after Peyton was born, Tracy and Greg divorced. According to reports, the divorce was amicable, but the custody arrangement for their daughter remains unclear. After divorcing Greg, Tracy moved herself and Peyton into her parents' home in eclectic Alabama. Stephen and Linda Pittman were overjoyed to have their grandchild and daughter living with them, and knew the arrangement was only temporary until Tracy got on her feet. Peyton grew into a happy and bright toddler under the watchful eyes of 3 guardians. On April 11, 1998, the paperwork had finally been processed, and Tracy and Greg were granted their decree absolutes, officially dissolving their marriage. This event filled Tracy with sadness at the loss of her marriage, but also hope at what else life had in store for her. To help support herself and her daughter, Tracy worked at the Alabama Reference Laboratory in Montgomery, a 45-minute drive from her parents' home. She also had previously worked at Russell Medical Center in Alexander City. At both clinics, Tracy worked as a trained phlebotomist, an achievement she was exceedingly proud of. Following her divorce, she felt that it was time for more changes in her life. She'd recently obtained a new job at a dental office, and she was due to start on Monday, April 27, 1998. Before Tracy could begin this new chapter of her career, tragedy would strike, leading her family on a decades-long hunt for justice and answers. On the evening of Sunday, April 26, 1998, Tracy grabbed Peyton and placed her in the car seat of her white 1993 Geo Storm. She told her parents that she was going out to run a few errands and would be back soon. Employees of a BP gas station on US Highway 231 North in Elmore County, Alabama, confirmed that Tracy filled up her car at around 6:30 p.m. that night. This account was also corroborated by customers. This was the last time that Tracy Pittman was ever seen or heard from. When she and Peyton failed to return home later that evening, her parents immediately set out looking for her. They searched the streets of Eclectic but found no sign of her whatsoever. After a failed search attempt, Stephen and Linda contacted the Elmore County Sheriff's Office to report the pair missing. Early the next morning, the Elmore County Sheriff's Office received a call from authorities in Wetumpka, 14.5 miles from Eclectic. A passerby had reported it seeing an abandoned white 1993 Geo Storm off of Old Georgia Road. The car itself was a bizarre sight, but as drivers took a further look, they saw a child strapped into the car seat with no parent in sight. Investigators were dispatched to the scene, which was around 10 minutes from the gas station where Tracy had last been seen. The Elmore County Sheriff's Office already knew of Tracy's disappearance, which made this discovery all the more troubling. In April of 1998, Old George Road was under construction, and Tracy's car was found around construction signs and warnings that the road ahead was closed. Investigators believed that Tracy had planned on driving back to her parents' home, but they couldn't understand why Tracy would have driven down a road under construction. There were alternative routes available back to Eclectic. When the Elmore County Sheriff's Office processed the car, they found that it was unlocked, the keys were in the ignition, and the radio was humming softly in the background. Tracy had just filled up her car with gas, and the car was in perfect working order. So why had she abandoned it? Greg Kegley, Tracy's ex-husband of just 15 days, was cleared as a suspect and was handed custody of their daughter. Search parties banded together and were sent to investigate nearby quarries and gravel pits that had been flooded due to bad weather. According to one report, a lake was also searched, but no sign of Tracy was found. In the years since Tracy's disappearance, the Elmore County Sheriff's Office has utilized cadaver dogs, drones, mapping technology, walking searches, and dive teams, as reported by the Wetumpka Herald. For decades, Tracy's case sat cold. But then in 2018, the Elmore County Sheriff's Office and the Alabama State Bureau of Investigation announced that they were executing a search warrant. The warrant covered over 300 acres of rural land where investigators hoped to find more clues. In 2015, Crime Stoppers aired a segment about Tracy's case, which led to a tip being called in. This tip ultimately led the police to that 300-acre stretch of land, although the nature of the tip has never been revealed. Since the 2018 announcement, Tracy's case has gone cold once more. Her parents funded billboards across Elmore County, hoping to keep her case alive and generate more leads. But few viable leads have come from this. April 26, 2024 will mark the 26th anniversary of Tracy's disappearance, and her family hopes that this year may finally be the year they get answers. Tracy Pittman is described as a white female with brown hair, green to hazel eyes, 5'10" and 140 pounds. Anyone with information is asked to contact Rick Lowry of the Elmore County Sheriff's Office at 334-567-5546, quoting case number M11-7707-327. Born sometime in 1914 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, the rest of Martha Alice Mertz's early life remains as mysterious as her disappearance. With the passage of time, Martha's case has become buried under the mountains of missing person cases that plague American investigators on a daily basis. Without social media or mass media interest, Martha's disappearance was known only to those close to her or within the community. Now, with the power of social media, a generation of internet sleuths is determined to get to the bottom of the mystery once and for all. 47-year-old Martha Mertz, maiden name unknown, was described as a happy and kind woman. Her family described her as fond of money, and she knew how to pinch pennies when it mattered most. She was incredibly thrifty, preferring to turn old fabric into new clothes instead of disposing of it. She worked at the Hubley Manufacturing Company, which produced cast iron products. Martha was a punctual and hardworking employee who was well liked by her colleagues. In the late 1940s, Martha met J. Kelvin Mertz, and the pair quickly fell in love. By 1950, the pair were married, and soon after moved into an apartment at 40 West Vine Street in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, their marriage was anything but blissful, and the pair could always be heard arguing. On several occasions, Martha would storm out of the apartment and call her sisters or her parents. Eventually, Martha would return to 40 West Vine Street, where the relationship would settle for a little while. The cycle of arguments continued as the years went by, and by 1961, Martha was becoming tired of the constant screaming. She told one friend that she wanted to leave Jay, and that she was planning to one day run away and nobody would know where she was. Her friend didn't take this comment seriously and supported her through this difficult time. June 22nd of 1961 started out like any other for Martha. She awoke early and got herself ready for the day before heading off to work. Later that evening, she returned with Jay following shortly after. At around 8 p.m., Martha and Jay found themselves embroiled in yet another argument. Another tenant of the apartment building would later tell the Lancaster Bureau of Police that the argument sounded no different to the other arguments the couple had. After several minutes of arguing, Jay told Martha that he was stepping out to buy some cigarettes and was going to take a walk to clear his head. When he returned from his trip, he found that his wife was gone. He assumed that Martha had taken off like many times before, and he decided to call his brother Daniel Mertz. According to the Lancaster New Era newspaper, Jay visited his brother that evening and requested to borrow some money. With this money, Jay made the 1,110-mile drive from his home in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, to his sister's home in Palm Beach, Florida. He would later tell the Lancaster police that he did this so he could cool off from the argument. Days after the argument had taken place and Martha had walked out, she was reported missing by her sister, Lena Pike, who had not heard from her in several days. Lena and the Lancaster police were surprised to hear that Jay was in Florida and not out looking for his wife. According to the Lancaster New Era, it was Daniel Mertz, Jay's brother, that notified him of his wife's disappearance, which prompted him to drive back to Pennsylvania. The Lancaster police questioned Jay at length, but he was unable to provide them with any answers. He stated that his wife had taken a suitcase, but wasn't able to name the contents of the suitcase. Bizarrely, Martha's new outfits, which she had carefully purchased just days before her disappearance, sat still on the coat hangers in her wardrobe. Once the questioning was over, Jay returned to Florida. En route to Florida, he claimed to have visited Martha's parents in Bishopville, South Carolina. Martha's parents had also not heard from her since June 22nd. During their investigation, the Lancaster police discovered that Martha had tucked $4,500 away in a savings account at the Lancaster County Bank. She also had $3,833 in her pension account from the Hubley Manufacturing Company. Martha and Jay also had a shared account which held about $2,000. On July 5th, Martha withdrew $800 from this account, and the last deposit to her savings account was made on June 19, 1961, where she deposited $26. They also made another bizarre discovery. Martha had failed to claim two paychecks. The first was for the week ending on June 18, 1961, and the second was for the week ending on June 25th. This wasn't the only uncashed check from the Hubley Manufacturing Company, as Martha had also failed to collect a $150 check that covered 3 weeks' holiday. After her disappearance, none of her accounts were accessed, and it appears that the majority of her income had been tucked away into her savings account. It's now been almost 63 years since Martha disappeared, and her case has failed to generate any substantial media coverage. There have been no updates or leads, and her case remains cold. Martha Alice Mertz is described as a white female with sandy brown hair, blue eyes, and 5 foot to 5'2" and 100 to 120 pounds. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Richard Mendez of the Lancaster Bureau of Police at 735-3300, quoting case number 0508-024860. 46-year-old Wendy Lynn Kahn was described by her daughter as a loving and devoted mother, friend, and colleague. Wendy's kind and caring disposition had garnered her a good group of friends and a solid career. Wendy and her 21-year-old daughter, Anisha, shared an especially close bond, as they'd been on their own for many years during Anisha's childhood. In 2011, Wendy got into a new relationship, and from there, her life seemed to be on the rise. Fast forward 7 years, and Wendy would disappear under bizarre circumstances. In 2011, Wendy met Mohammed Bilal Chugtai, who had immigrated from Pakistan to the United States in the mid-1980s. For many years, the boundaries and definition of their relationship remained unclear. Reports indicate that the pair were not exclusive and likely saw other people. During the 2010s, Wendy lived all over the northern US, residing in Iowa, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota. Finally, Wendy decided to settle in Minnesota with her daughter Anisha. As the years went by, Wendy and Mohammed continued to see each other, and their relationship was anything but peaceful, with one report describing it as tumultuous. The pair would frequently argue about different matters, with the arguments becoming loud and explosive. In September of 2017, Mohammed asked Wendy a big question. He asked her to move in with him at his home in Minnesota. Wendy hoped that this would be the fresh start that they both needed, and accepted the move. As per the Charlie Project, December of 2017 was also the first time the pair began to see each other exclusively. Shortly after moving in with Mohammed, Wendy began to think it might have been a mistake. The arguments continued and the mood was tense. By May of 2018, Wendy knew that she had to get out of there and confided in her daughter Anisha that the relationship wasn't working. Mohammed agreed with Wendy, telling her that he was going to sell the home. Following this announcement, Wendy and Anisha began hunting for apartments for her, but before they got to visit any of them, Wendy disappeared. On May 31st, 2018, Anisha would see her mother for the last time. That day, Wendy accompanied her daughter to a doctor's appointment before the two ran some errands. After running errands, the pair went back to the home Wendy shared with Mohammed, which instantly created problems. According to reports, Anisha and Mohammed had previously argued, which created a lot of tension. When Mohammed walked into the living room and saw Anisha sitting there, he immediately began to shout at her, telling her to get out of his house. He continued shouting, telling her he would call the police if she didn't leave. Wendy was able to defuse the situation and gave Anisha a ride home. On June 1st, 2018, Anisha called her mother after she had finished work, something the pair usually did. Anisha told police that the call was brief, around 15 minutes, and everything seemed fine with her mother. The two talked about their day and what they had planned. During the call, Anisha offered to spend the evening with her mother, to which Wendy responded, "No, you have plans. Don't worry about me. Have fun." Shortly after, the two disconnected the call. This would be the last time anyone would hear from Wendy Kahn. On June 2nd, 2018, Anisha tried to call her mother, as was routine, but Wendy wasn't answering. After several missed calls, Anisha decided to stop by her mother's home and was shocked to find it empty. Neither Wendy nor Mohammed was home, and Wendy's black 2011 Nissan Sentra was also missing. Throughout the night, Anisha continued trying to contact her mother to no avail. Concerned, Anisha called her father, Wendy's ex-husband, and asked for help. The following day, June 3rd, 2018, the pair went down to the Mankato Department of Public Safety to report Wendy missing. And while the report was taken, it was clear that the officers didn't take it seriously. Anisha showed investigators texts between Wendy and Mohammed, which they immediately laughed off, commenting that Wendy was playing the victim. Anisha also claims that while the report was being filed, nobody issued her a case number, contact number, or even a badge number. Instead, she was told to dial 911 if she had any questions or required an update. Later, the same police department told Anisha, quote, "You know, her case is still open, but it's not a top priority case right now." The next update in Wendy's case didn't come until a week after she was last seen, on June 7th, 2018. Her black 2011 Nissan Sentra was found abandoned in the 200 block of Bell Avenue behind a CVS pharmacy. Bizarrely, the driver's side tire had been punctured. It was later determined that this puncture was intentional and had been caused by a blade. A large-scale search for Wendy was finally put together upon the discovery of her car, but her family feared that it may have been too late. A search of the home Wendy and Mohammed shared showed no signs of foul play, and Wendy had left everything behind, including her beloved cats. The only items that remained unaccounted for were Wendy's purse and phone. Investigators dove into her accounts and discovered that her bank was last accessed or used on May 30th, 2018, and her phone was last used on June 2nd. In July of 2018, Wendy's case would take another bizarre turn when Mohammed sold his home overnight and then disappeared. He left behind his car and other personal belongings and didn't even collect the proceeds from the sale of his home. According to the police, Mohammed has never officially been reported missing, and the status of his whereabouts is still unknown. While digging into Mohammed's background, investigators did find some troubling information. At the time of Wendy's disappearance, Mohammed had 2 active warrants for violating his probation, stalking, and violating a restraining order in Blue Earth County, Minnesota. According to sources, these charges stem from Mohammed's previous marriage, and it stated that he stalked his ex-wife and his children. Mohammed also has a misdemeanor conviction for domestic assault in his previous relationship. It's important to note that Mohammed has not been named a suspect or even a person of interest in Wendy's disappearance, and his whereabouts still remain a mystery. Wendy Lynn Kahn is described as a white female with red or auburn hair, green eyes, 5'5" and 160 pounds. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Jason Bennett of the Mankato Department of Public Safety at 507-387-8780. Quoting case number 1816961. 21-year-old Rose Marie Bly was described as a loving mother to her 2 children and nieces and nephews. Rose worked incredibly hard to provide for her 2 children and had big dreams of her own. After work, Rose enjoyed riding horses and hoped to one day become a published children's author. She loved children and enjoyed working with them, something that spoke to her kind and calm temperament. In 2009, Rose's family received the call that most parents dread. She was missing, and nobody had any idea what happened to her. On September 16, 1987, Candace Harrer and Clenneth Bly welcomed Rose Marie Bly into the world. The family, including siblings, would grow up in the small town of Grantsburg, Wisconsin. Candace Wells, Rose's sister, recalled their childhood, noting how it was a peaceful existence close to a state forest. As a child, Rose discovered horse riding and was immediately hooked. She would sneak into the fields and ride horses any chance she could get, even if she was supposed to be doing homework or chores. In 2005, Rose graduated from Grantsburg High School, and she wasn't sure what direction to take next. During her time at Grantsburg High School, Rose met Christopher Larson, and the 2 became an item. Their relationship continued after graduation, and months after throwing their caps in the air, they discovered they were expecting a child. Soon after, Rose and Chris welcomed their daughter into the world. Shortly after the arrival of their daughter, they moved from Grantsburg to the city of St. Croix Falls. The pair worked hard to navigate being first-time parents, as well as young adults. By all accounts, they were a happy family unit, and just 18 months after their first child was born, the couple welcomed another daughter into the world. The pressures of adult life and parenthood began to show in their relationship. The pair would frequently argue, with these arguments sometimes becoming physical. In early 2009, the Polk County Sheriff's Office was called to the Larson home on a call of a domestic disturbance. Rose's family would state that it was Chris who was physical towards Rose, but on this occasion, it was Rose who would be charged with physical assault. According to the Charlie Project, Chris accused Rose of slapping him, while Rose stated that he had put her in a headlock and banged her head on the ground. In February of 2009, the pair wed in a ceremony surrounded by friends and family, but now that marriage was in jeopardy. Following this incident, Chris filed a motion for divorce in June of 2009, citing Rose's physical assault. The divorce didn't go through, as Chris withdrew the motion weeks later, when he and Rose eventually got back together. The pair hoped that this would be the new start and breath of fresh air that their relationship needed. And after this, it appears the relationship got back on track. According to Chris, Rose was seen for the last time on August 21, 2009, at around 7:30 p.m. when she left her home in St. Croix Falls. That evening, Rose left in her white 2001 Pontiac Grand Am to drive to the nearby town of Cushing, Wisconsin. Rose had planned to meet up with her cousin at a bar where they wanted to do some karaoke. A few hours after leaving, Rose called Chris to let him know that she was going to be out late and to anticipate her home around midnight. This was the last time that Chris ever spoke to his wife again. When Rose failed to return home that evening, Chris immediately became worried and contacted the Polk County Sheriff's Department. Investigators were sent to the family home on River Road, and they began retracing her last steps. The first stop on the investigators' list was the bar that Rose was headed to in Cushing, just 5 miles from St. Croix Falls. The Polk County Sheriff's Department contacted Rose's cousin, and that's when they learned something bizarre. Rose's cousin explained that there were no plans to meet up the night before. Investigators continued to question Rose's cousin, who was adamant that the pair had never arranged to meet at a bar for drinks or karaoke. This would just be the first of a puzzling trail of clues in Rose's disappearance. On August 26, 2009, 5 days after Rose disappeared, her white 2001 Pontiac Grand Am was found abandoned in Grantsburg, Wisconsin, 14 miles from Cushing and 27 miles from her home in St. Croix Falls. Investigators were puzzled. If Rose had been heading for Cushing, why was her car found 14 miles north in her hometown of Grantsburg? According to reports, Rose's mother and family members still lived in Grantsburg, but none of them recalled seeing her after she disappeared on August 21st of 2009. According to the Polk County Sheriff's Office, the location where Rose's car was found was a parking lot behind a post office, which is usually used by truck drivers parking up their trailers. In their report, they didn't note any damage to the car, and the only thing missing aside from Rose were the keys. In the wake of this discovery, investigators in Grantsburg also joined in on the search for Rose. Searchers and volunteers scoured St. Croix Falls, Cushing, and Grantsburg for her, but there was no sign of her. Her mobile phone records were scoured, but nothing of note was found. Interestingly, the Charlie Project notes that 3 weeks after Rose disappeared, Chris refiled for divorce. Chris Larson also tried to take out a court order against Rose, which would have prevented her from returning and taking the children. It's unknown whether this court order or divorce stem from the previous June 2009 incident. While talking to Candace Harrer, investigators also uncovered another possible clue. A week before Rose disappeared, she had fallen from a horse. During a call between the mother and daughter, Rose told Candace that she was having headaches that were causing her significant pain. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear that Rose sought medical treatment for this injury, and it's unknown whether this was a contributing factor in her disappearance. A year after Rose disappeared, in 2010, Chris Larson was granted the divorce and full custody of his 2 daughters. The Polk County Sheriff's Department also commented that Chris was not considered a suspect and had passed a lie detector test. 12 years after Rose's bizarre disappearance, the Bly family would be struck with yet another tragedy. On June 15th of 2021, Summer Wells, the niece of Rose, disappeared from her home in Rogersville, Tennessee. Just like her aunt's case, the disappearance of Summer remains unsolved. While the 2 cases are not thought to be connected, they are an eerie coincidence and a source of pain for the family. Rosemarie Bly is described as a white female with brown hair, brown eyes, 5 foot to 5'2", and 100 to 110 pounds. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Polk County Sheriff's Department at 715-485-8366, quoting case number 1724-2009, or contact FBI VICAP at 800-634-4097. Some criminals are so brazen in their actions that they seemingly don't care whether they're caught on CCTV footage or not. And in one case that occurred in Kenya in 2018, a group of robbers were brave enough to carry out a robbery just yards from a local police station. The store in question is called the Fauna Supermarket, and it's located in an area called Pipeline in Kenya. Luckily, investigators had more than enough CCTV security footage to work with, since the same robbers had also been at the store the previous day. When news of the robbery broke, members of the media traveled to the store and interviewed one of its employees. a woman named Anne Wembui, who tends to the store's register, and she revealed that the three robbers clearly visited the premises the previous day to properly plan their crime. In footage obtained after the robbery, two men can be seen arriving at the store at 11:34 a.m. One of the men enters the store and proceeds to the counter, where he purchases a cell phone credit voucher while his accomplice remains outside. It's clear that the second man is taking careful note of the number of cameras on the premises, as well as the areas that they're pointing at. In the footage, the first man is wearing a white, long-sleeved button-up shirt with black pants and black shoes, while his friend is dressed in white and a red shirt, blue jeans, and white shoes. The first man then exits the store and meets back up with his friend before the pair walk away. They then use the information that they gathered that day to plan a robbery for the next day, but surprisingly they made one crucial mistake. The same two men are seen on cameras inside the store the next day at 8:37 p.m. as they enter the premises to finally carry out their plan. But quite unbelievably, they're both wearing some of the same clothes they had on the previous day, with the exception of an extra shirt each, something that even the most inexperienced criminal would consider a silly mistake. But they did, however, attempt to hide their identities somewhat by wearing woolen hats, though this was rendered somewhat superfluous by the fact that they could be recognized by their clothing. Just a few moments after entering the store, the two men approached the counter and produced a firearm while barking orders at employees. Outside the store, a third robber on a motorbike could be seen waiting for his two friends, obviously remaining on the lookout and readying himself for a quick getaway. In the meantime, the two men inside the store can be seen helping themselves to items from the shelves, including packs of cigarettes, after ordering members of the staff and customers into the back of the store. They also managed to empty the store's cash register. Their mission is cut short though, when a customer arrives in a car and the two robbers inside the store have no choice but to rush outside. Here, they also robbed the driver of his cell phone and an undisclosed amount of cash before fleeing on two awaiting motorbikes. The robbers had the foresight to use fake number plates on the bikes, and hence they couldn't be traced this way. As the three men sped off with their ill-gotten goods, one of them fired a few rounds into the air in case someone tried to follow them, and they were able to make a clean getaway. When all was said and done, the store had been robbed of about $650 in cash, along with several items from the shelves, and a manhunt was launched to track them down. Many people in the area pointed out that the store is located a very short distance from a police station, and they've expressed their frustration at the fact that the robbers weren't stopped, claiming that officers at the station have been lax in their duties in the past, and that they took a long time to arrive at the store after they were called. Despite being captured on CCTV footage, the three robbers have never been identified, and local police are still hopeful that they'll receive leads that'll bring them to justice. In November of 2023, two criminals carried out a daring robbery at a hotel in Stirling in Adelaide Hills, Australia. And despite being captured by the premises' CCTV security cameras, they're yet to be identified or taken into custody. The incident occurred on the 13th of November 2023 at 2 minutes past midnight, when staff members inside the hotel started hearing strange banging noises coming from the hotel's gaming room just a short time after it had been closed up for the day. Realizing that something untoward was going on, the staff members quickly moved to a safe room and managed to call the police to report that a robbery was in progress. Upon investigators' arrival, they checked the hotel's CCTV security footage in hopes that the robbers could be identified. In the footage that was later released to the public, the gaming room's door can suddenly be seen falling as the two men brazenly and noisily kicked it down, and just a moment later, a man can be seen entering the premises. The first robber to enter the room can be seen wearing a white hooded sweatshirt with a black top, black pants, and white shoes. His accomplice follows closely behind him, wearing a gray hooded sweatshirt, black pants, and orange or red shoes. Both men were also donning gloves to keep their fingerprints from being left behind at the crime scene. The two burglars then make their way into the gaming room, and judging by their body language, they seem extremely nervous as they run into the room and behind a counter where the cash is kept. Though the two robbers seem to know their way around the premises, they seem too hasty, as they can be seen dropping items that they've picked up on multiple occasions. Most notably, a bag that's presumed to contain cash. As one of the men runs out from behind the counter, he attempts to squeeze out between the counter and a wall, but he drops the box that he's carrying and has to make several attempts to pick it up, causing the box to come apart in his hands. The second man seems a little more composed as he makes his way around the counter, and he has no trouble getting out of the room. Ironically, the men run right past an ATM that's situated near the gaming room's entrance, and as they flee, we can see the bags of cash that they had collected. The first man takes a stuttering step as he reaches the door, and returns to the room for a moment before his accomplice joins him, and with their heads bowed to avoid their faces being seen by the camera above the door, they finally manage to make their way outside before fleeing the area. According to investigators, the men were in such a rush to get away from the hotel that they didn't bother to pick up some of the cash that they had dropped in the parking lot, and that money had been taken into evidence. After arriving at the scene, investigators conducted a search of the area in case the robbers were still in the vicinity, or since they may have left further evidence behind, but they were unable to find anything useful. None of the staff members who were on duty that night were confronted by the robbers, and no one was injured during the incident, though the hotel's management did state that they would be providing counseling to staff members, as it was still a very traumatizing experience. The CCTV footage of the robbery was released to the public in hopes that one of the two criminals would be recognized, but no one has come forward with information yet, and the investigation is still ongoing. A spokesman for the hotel stated that the two men were obviously familiar with the layout of the gaming room, as they headed straight for the cash and managed to make their escape just 2 minutes after breaking the door down. Investigators have asked anyone who recognizes these two men, or who has any useful information on the robbery, to come forward either by phoning Crime Stoppers at 1-800-333-000, or alternatively by submitting a tip at crimestopperssa.com.au. Any information given will be treated as confidential, and if you wish to do so, you can remain anonymous. Most criminals are aware of the fact that many streets and businesses are equipped with CCTV cameras, but this isn't always enough to deter them, as some crimes are committed in broad daylight in full view of these cameras, which thankfully makes the police's work much easier if the footage is of good quality. One such incident happened on the 20th of November, 2023 in India, merely moments after a college student disembarked from a bus at around 8:50 a.m. And thankfully on this occasion, CCTV footage helped bring the case to a close. The student, who's since been identified as 19-year-old Prachi Vyas, was on her way to her uncle's house where she planned to attend a housewarming party, though some sources claim that she was on her way back home after a Diwali celebration. She and her brother had planned to meet each other a short distance from the bus stop, and in the security footage of the incident, she can be seen arriving at the gas pump where she intended to wait for it. A group of men can be seen standing a short distance away while filling a moped with gas. But in the next moment, things take a sinister turn when two more men arrive on a motorbike and they approach Prachi. One of the men then grabs her, and despite her struggles, walks her over to the motorbike where his friend is waiting. The man then picks her up and places her on the bike, after which he attempts to get on behind her, but fails as there isn't enough space on the bike seat. He can be seen running after the bike as his accomplice starts to make his getaway, and it would later be reported that he did eventually get on, and that Prachi had been abducted in broad daylight in a matter of seconds. Shockingly, none of the men standing close by made any attempt to intervene, likely because they were in fear of their lives, and the two abductors were able to make a clean getaway, with Prachi wedged securely between them on the bike. None of the witnesses at the scene were able to identify the kidnappers, since the driver was wearing a helmet and his accomplice had a black cloth of some kind over his face, and investigators faced the daunting challenge of tracking the two criminals down. Luckily, they didn't have to wait too long for a lead to come in, as they were informed that Prachi was friends with a 22-year-old man named Rohit Kishwaha, who lives in the same area that she came from. Kishwaha immediately became a person of interest in the kidnapping, as it came to light that he and Prachi had been involved in an altercation at her house earlier that same day, in which he threatened her with a firearm, but he still had to be tracked down for questioning. Her family informed investigators that Kishwaha had been stalking Prachi and that a case had already been opened against him. They would then reveal that they were also present when the abduction took place, and that Prachi was abducted when she walked over to a water cooler for a drink, They also claimed that when Kishwaha arrived at Prachi's home earlier that day, she rejected his advances, which angered him, and he assaulted her before fleeing the area. A report was filed with the police, but it's alleged that the incident was never followed up on. Since neither of the abductors could be identified via CCTV footage, investigators had to rely on witness accounts to try and track them down. Luckily, some of the bystanders were able to identify Kishwaha, as he'd been hanging around the bus stop for some time before Prachi and her family arrived. Police would later reveal that thanks to this evidence supplied by witnesses, both Kishwaha and his accomplice were eventually tracked down and arrested. Prachi was found unharmed and returned to her family home, where she made a full recovery from the traumatic experience. It isn't known where the two men are being held or what possible sentences they face for their crimes, but for the time being, they've been removed from the streets, and it's likely to be a while before they'll be released from prison, since abduction is a very serious crime that usually results in a very long time in prison. Coming home to find that your house or apartment has been burglarized is a scary and traumatic experience that usually results in people feeling that their privacy has been invaded, and leaves them with the daunting prospect of replacing all of the items that have been stolen. But it must be far worse to realize that your house is being burgled while you're still inside, since you have no way of knowing what the burglar's intentions are, or what they'll do when they discover that someone is in the building while they're carrying out their crime. This is a terrifying experience that a resident of Hollywood Hills in Los Angeles went through in April of 2022, during a time when brazen crimes in the area were running rampant, and he considers himself lucky to have escaped the incident without injury. The man, who's decided to remain unnamed, told investigators that he'd heard strange noises coming from somewhere in his house, which is located on Pacific View Drive, while he was watching TV in his bedroom, and his first thought was that raccoons had somehow gotten into his house. His dogs started barking, and then he decided to check his security camera to see where the noises were coming from, but to his shock and horror, he discovered that the noises were, in fact, not being made by raccoons, but by a group of robbers that had gained entry into his house. The first sight that he was greeted by was one of the robbers who was in the process of placing a rolled-up carpet in the house's doorway to keep it from shutting on its own. The man says he was shocked at the brazen nature of the crime, since there was no doubt in his mind that the robbers knew someone was home, but they carried out their plan anyway. Knowing that his life could be in danger, the man ran into his bathroom to hide, and here he phoned 911 for help. He stated that the dispatcher stayed on the line with him while police officers were being sent to his house. They would eventually arrive about 7 to 10 minutes later, but the robbers had already made their getaway after doing serious damage to the house. In each area that the robbers ransacked, furniture was overturned. Appliances were damaged, and in the house's laundry room, they threw items around while they searched for valuables to steal. He added that at that point, he had to keep completely still, since all 4 of the robbers were just on the other side of the wall, and he became concerned that they would enter the bathroom where he was hiding. He then looked out from the bathroom towards the living room, and this is when the burglars spotted him and decided that it would be better to flee as quickly as they could. In CCTV security footage that was later made available to the public, knocking sounds can be heard as the men made their way into the house. In video from a camera inside the house, the 4 men can be seen pilfering through drawers and cabinets throughout the house, and judging by their demeanor, they seem completely unfazed by the fact that someone is in the house with them. All of the robbers had their faces covered, making it hard to identify them. One of the men can be seen wearing a bright yellow hooded jacket with light-colored jeans and white shoes. One of his accomplices is seen wearing a gray balaclava with a white top, blue jeans, and white shoes. At one point, one of the robbers, who's wearing 3/4 length shorts, a dark blue jacket, black shoes, and green gloves, spots one of the security cameras, and he immediately moves it so that it points away from them. The moment when they spot the homeowner is clear in the footage, as all of the robbers suddenly turn and run for the house's front door, and cameras outside the house show them dashing through his front yard as they make their getaway. Several of the man's neighbors would come forward the following day to report that their houses had also been broken into, though investigators were unsure whether these crimes were connected to the one caught on camera. Multiple witnesses would come forward to state that they saw a black SUV in the area, and this same vehicle was also caught by CCTV cameras as it was being driven away from the neighborhood. Police also released CCTV footage from similar crimes in the area, in which burglars would wait for homeowners to arrive home after shopping at high-end stores, and they would then be robbed of these items. Thankfully, 2 of the robbers in this case were quickly tracked down and arrested, though the 2 remaining burglars have not been identified. The first man was identified thanks to facial recognition technology, while the second was recognized thanks to the clothing that he was wearing. The homeowner has stated that the incident has left him feeling jaded and that he'll likely move away from Los Angeles since he no longer feels safe inside of his own home. CCTV footage doesn't always result in an arrest right away, since in some cases, investigators need to compile a lot of evidence before a culprit can be identified. And sometimes this takes multiple instances of security footage being carefully revised. But this usually also means that the culprits are free to commit more crimes while an investigation is ongoing. And in the case of 42-year-old Dmytro Sherbinski and 34-year-old Ghislaine Kiamwangana, 2 men from London, England, this was their undoing. In January of 2022, the 2 men traveled to 3 different hotels in the city and proceeded to rob them of a total of almost $9,000. Though they were caught on CCTV cameras multiple times during their 2-week crime spree. The first robbery took place at a hotel located on Southwark Road on the 3rd of January 2023, when the 2 men entered the premises and produced firearms, after which they ordered staff members into a small back office and proceeded to bind their hands. They then forced them to reveal the safe's combination, resulting in about $5,000 being stolen from the safe and cash registers. The next robbery would take place less than a week later in Canning Town, but this one wouldn't go as smoothly as they had planned. After entering the hotel on this occasion, the men again produced firearms and pointed them at one of the hotel's employees, but unexpectedly, another staff member decided to make a run for it, resulting in a chase from Sherbinski, but the employee managed to get away successfully. They then tried to force the remaining staff members to reveal the safe's combination, but when they realized that the man didn't know the combination, they had no choice but to flee with nothing to show for their efforts. On the 14th of January, Sherbinski and Kiamwangana would carry out their 3rd robbery, and this time, they managed to steal a further $4,000 after employing the same tactics they'd used during the first 2 robberies. But their plans were far from flawless. Investigators scoured through CCTV footage from all 3 hotels and found that the 2 men wore the same clothes during each incident, though this wasn't enough to positively identify them. It then became apparent that the robbers had used a white Sprinter van during each of their heists, and that it had a cloned license plate installed, a different number being used during each of the robberies. This resulted in a joint operation being undertaken by the Metropolitan Police and the City of London Police, and soon they discovered that the getaway van had been stolen in December of 2021, while its owner was busy filling it with gas in the lakeside area. It then became apparent that one of the robbers was Dmytro Sherbinski, and information was received that he was living in the Romford area. Investigators proceeded to trawl the streets in search of him, and while this was being done, the stolen van was found on Blossom Close. This allowed investigators to keep the van under surveillance, and for the next 9 days, they kept a close eye on Sherbinski, who was still driving around in the stolen vehicle, despite being sought. Their patience would pay off just over a week later when Sherbinski and Kiamwangana met up at a block of apartments in Greenwich, where they would eventually be taken into custody. The clothing that was worn by the robbers during their heists was found at Kiamwangana's apartment, along with a gas-powered firearm, and at Sherbinski's apartment they retrieved ammunition, as well as fake license plates that were seen in the CCTV footage. Each of the robbers was charged with 2 counts of robbery, 1 count of attempted robbery, and 3 counts of possessing a firearm. Kiamwangana would face additional theft charges after it was discovered that he had stolen more than $15,000 from a safe in a hotel, where he was employed in 2021. A police spokesperson stated that they were determined to capture the 2 men, as they had displayed acts of aggression during the robberies, and it was of the utmost importance to remove them from the streets before one of their robberies ended in tragedy. After being questioned by investigators, it was revealed that Sherbinski was the mastermind behind the 3 heists, which resulted in him being sentenced to a total of 12 years behind bars following his trial at the Snaresbrook Crown Court. But Kiem Wangana, who's a French national, didn't get off lightly, as he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for his role in the robberies, and it'll be a long time before either man is allowed to apply for parole. On the 9th of April, an alleged armed robbery took place in Vancouver at a Yaletown nightclub. New information has since been released regarding this incident. Authorities are searching for a man who may be in connection with or have information regarding the ordeal that took place at the nightclub. Video footage reveals a clean-shaven man wearing a baseball hat with the New York Yankees logo, hanging around near the nightclub as well as entering it. He was wearing a black tracksuit with black shoes. That evening, it was alleged that 2 suspects had entered the nightclub after trading hours and were said to have been armed. One of them was equipped with a sharpened blade while the other carried a firearm. The 2 had threatened the staff members before making off with $25,000. During the incident, 6 individuals would have their hands zip-tied and they were confined. One of these victims had sustained such a severe injury that it would be described as life-altering. A number of suspects have said to have been identified, but none of them have been confirmed, as additional evidence may be needed before charges can be set forth. It was asked whether the man in the CCTV image is said to have been a witness or a suspect, to which the authorities responded that he's neither. They simply want to discuss the ordeal with him and inquire for further information. The nightclub in question is not being named, as stated by the Vancouver Police Department spokesperson, Tanya Vicenten, who explained that the nightclub is not relevant to the investigation. It was later confirmed by a news platform that the club was called Bar None, situated at 1222 Hamilton Street. Authorities believe that this individual was most likely present during the offense and may hold some crucial information. Should anyone have any information regarding the man in the CCTV images, you're urged to contact the Vancouver Police Department's Major Crimes Section at 604-717-2541. When questioned about why the public was only hearing about such a serious robbery months after it had taken place, Vicenten explained that releasing any information early on may have affected the investigation. It's expressed that there was no public safety risk, and if there had been, as stated by Vicenten, that it would have gone out with a warning. It's uncertain as to how the authorities believe this man is connected to the incident that occurred that evening. In the video, you can see the man as he approaches the nightclub. He's led through, and the next camera catches him and another man entering through the doorway. The 2 men then continue into the club. In another piece of footage, the same individual is seen back outside the club speaking to a man in a gray coat. The Vancouver nightclub was said to be the target of a takeover-styled robbery. No further information has since been confirmed regarding this incident. No tips on who the man may have been have come through. It's also not been said if any perpetrators have been apprehended. For the time being, this case remains active and ongoing. Back in January of 2018, 90-year-old William Ritchie, known to most as Bill, was last seen by his neighbors 1 week prior in the West Road region of Fraserburgh. Scotland police have since released CCTV footage of the missing pensioner, which shows him at Asda in the town. The footage was taken in December of the previous year and is said to be the last confirmed image. Authorities learned of his disappearance on the 14th of January when they'd been contacted by neighbors who were concerned for William's well-being. Neighbors had taken note that he had not gone on his usual routine, which is said to consist of walking in and around Fraserburgh throughout the day on a daily basis. He was a keen walker and walked long distances regularly. William would journey as far as Memsey and Stricken, but closer to his disappearance, he was trying to stay near his home on these walks. He was also a regular customer at the local Asda, post office, and co-op. A major search investigation quickly ensued for the missing man within Fraserburgh. Searches of roads and walking routes were carried out with the aid of specialist resources that included a helicopter, canine units, a 5-unit, as well as police search advisors. Authorities were contacted by various witnesses who stated that they'd seen him in the town after the video footage had taken place, which means he had disappeared in the weeks after that. Over a 6-month period, those tips were followed up and searches of certain areas would be revisited to ensure that every single route that he could have taken was thoroughly investigated. This would also include areas that were close to the shore, as well as the rural routes and even an old railway line. CCTV of nearby areas was searched extensively, along with various house-to-house visits. This was used to build an image of William's life and where they would be led to search next. Stuart Drummond, a detective inspector, explained that he knows that those who know the missing man or recognize him have too been anxious to know his whereabouts. It's a frustrating case for the authorities, as stated by Drummond. Drummond further released that the authorities are aware of the multiple sightings of William within the area, and those leads are being investigated. He disclosed that their inquiries led to the idea that the man had been ill at the time of his disappearance. He was reportedly looking frail, unfit, and wasn't as agile as people knew him to be. Despite perhaps being ill, William pressed on with his walks around the town, shorelines, and rural roads. It was furthered that extensive efforts have been exhausted and the search would be scaling back. They'd also handed out missing person leaflets seeking any information. But it was assured that the authorities would be acting on any new information that may arise in this case. It's never too late to get a hold of the authorities regarding this missing person, and it's encouraged that witnesses should contact the police on 101 and quote case number 2549 of January 14. The detective inspector added that the department would also like to thank those who've provided them with information and assisted in the extensive searches. This missing man is said to have been 5 feet and 7 inches tall with a slim build. He's described as having short gray hair. According to Inspector Kevin Goldie, William may be wearing either a 3/4 black jacket or a waterproof jacket that has a hood. He could also be wearing a flat hat. Scotland police are said to work in close partnership with the Missing People charity, which is the only charity in the United Kingdom that specializes in bringing missing children and adults back to their families. The Missing People charity can be contacted through a free phone contact at 116-000 or by their website. For non-emergency calls and inquiries, you're asked to call 101. A strange incident was captured on CCTV footage at Nat West on Gosforth High Street in Newcastle. This allegedly took place on the 8th of August in 2014. The footage shows the moment that an unarmed perpetrator enters the Nat West Bank and threatens the staff members. It was stated that he made off with over £2,000. On the 8th of August, around 9 that morning, a man dressed in a tracksuit and a hooded sweater with the Great British flag printed on the front entered the branch. He was additionally wearing some sunglasses. He was seen placing a brick before the door to prevent it from closing. He then lifted his hood to further conceal his identity. The brave, unarmed man approaches the counter and speaks to 2 of the women behind the protective window. He spoke with them for several seconds before being interrupted by a witness who stood behind him. He then turned his attention back to the women and pressed on with his demands before being handed a wad of cash, which was later found out to be about £2,480. After the unknown individual left the bank, he remained at a calm walking pace until he reached the corner of Gosforth Shopping Mall. At this point, the thief begins to run and escapes through the southernmost entrance. None of the staff or witnesses were injured during the ordeal. Authorities believe that the perpetrator was not armed during this time. It's been suggested that the man had scared bank staff by stating that he had a concealed weapon of some sort. The Northumbria police detective, Sergeant John Gibson, expressed that the authorities would like to speak with anyone who'd been in this area at the time that the ordeal had occurred. It's suggested that the robber was hanging around the area before 9 a.m. During this time, the Gosforth area was bustling. The authorities would like to hear from any witnesses who may have seen something suspicious, and whoever may recognize the individual. During the initial investigation, the police cordoned off the Nat West branch and its multi-story parking, while ground searches ensued, followed by a helicopter. The bank and Bridgeford estate agents, who were next door, had been closed for a few hours while forensics gathered any evidence that may be in the area. This robbery had certainly shocked the shoppers, and it even forced some of the nearby stores to lock up. One local store manager, Nicola Krzyzak, who manages Thomas Kook, which is across from the bank, said that from that point on, they would be operating a closed-door policy because you never know who's out there, and the safety of the staff is paramount. Anyone who may recognize the individual pictured in the CCTV images is encouraged to contact the police on 101 extension number 69191, and quoting 3200-80814 as the reference number. Bernard Grimple was born in 1992 to parents who had immigrated to Canada. It's said that his family was close during his childhood. This would continue as well into adulthood. When Bernard was 13 years old, he went to Israel to go to his sister's wedding. He enjoyed the trip so much that he would later go back there as a birthright trip. In June of 2021, Bernard and his family planned another trip to Israel. He'd also come to be a competitive athlete who excelled in soccer as well as swimming. He's described as being talented and passionate, and he would also later begin swimming lessons for the youth when he became an adult. The children that he taught would later say that the man had a positive impact on their lives, and his friends spoke highly of him, describing him as an easygoing and likable person. This is why so many became distraught when Bernard disappeared. The timeline began on the 14th of May in 2020. On this day, Bernard had spoken with his parents on the phone as well as texted his sister. The day appeared normal and nothing seemed out of place. At around 8:45 that evening, Bernard could be seen on CCTV footage visiting a 7-Eleven store situated at 100th Avenue and 152nd Street in Surrey. It's thought that the man made use of his debit card to purchase some food items. He'd been alone at this time. Around 11 that same evening, Bernard is believed to have gotten onto the 340 bus heading to North Delta. It was at that time that Bernard had used his bus card to board. It's believed that the person who boarded was in fact Bernard and not someone else, as this was his normal route which he would take to his parents' house. It wasn't unusual for him to return this late in the evening, as he and his mother are said to be self-proclaimed night owls. Boarders are not required to swipe their card to get off the bus, so it's uncertain as to where the missing man may have gotten off. If he did get off at his normal route, it's said to be a rather busy intersection. There are surrounding stores, restaurants, and traffic day and night. If he'd gotten off at this stop, he would have been seen. The following day, when Bernard's family tried to make contact with him, they were unsuccessful and were immediately concerned. Bernard usually stays in contact with them. On the 16th of May, he was reported missing and the search began. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police began to look into the case, but they didn't seem to take it seriously. They requested CCTV footage from the bus that he used, but by the time they had done so, the recording had already been deleted. While Bernard may have been an adult, behavior like this was particularly unusual to his family, and there was an added concern because he'd been on medication for anxiety. It was found that the missing 29-year-old did have his wallet along with his mobile phone, which pinged for the last time at 5:32 that afternoon. It's believed that after that, his phone must have run dead. Bernard's family aided in the investigation and even started taking the bus at that exact time and questioned others who boarded and were already on board in case they had seen anything, but no one had noticed anything out of sorts. The bus route was found to also cross over the Queensboro Bridge, as well as the Alex Fraser Bridge, over the Fraser River. This river was allegedly searched too, but to no avail. There are additionally 2 forest areas on the route, including Burns Bog Delta Nature Preserve, which is over 5,000 acres. Family and friends of Bernard would also put up missing person flyers around the neighborhoods in a tireless effort to find the missing man. A website was started, and so was a petition. A GoFundMe has also since been set up along with a YouTube channel, all dedicated to the search for Bernard. Sightings after some time did begin to flood in. Some said that they had seen him in Vancouver, but it was soon discovered that he'd been misidentified. Anyone who has any information regarding the whereabouts of this man is encouraged to make contact with the Surrey RCMP at 604-599-0502. Anonymous tips can also be left with Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477 or solvecrime.ca. There have been a few theories as possibilities that have since come to light. The first is that Bernard may have met someone on his bus trip. This person may have convinced him to go with him to a different place. No one on this bus had seen anything unusual, but it's found that this bus sees around 1.4 million people board each year, who may be distracted by looking at their phones or reading a book. This theory may have led the missing man to trouble, or even an unfamiliar area in which he had gotten lost. But Bernard did know the area well, as this is where he grew up. He also knew a lot of people there, and a lot of them knew him as well. This would allude to the idea that he may have been involved in an accident of some kind. The second possibility theorizes that he might have come to meet someone when he exited the bus. Some web sleuths have even considered the idea that he'd witnessed a crime while heading to his parents' house, which ultimately put him in danger. No crimes have been reported that evening, but the possibility remains open. Bernard may have found himself in a critical situation. Thorough searches have been carried out in the area, but to no avail. The third theory suggests that Bernard had planned to run away, which is supported by his cell phone being turned off. It was all part of the plan. But his phone had never been turned off, and his bank cards were not used after his purchase on the 14th of May. His family maintains that the man appeared normal that day, and he always kept in contact with them. It's reminded that Bernard was excited about the upcoming trip to Israel, so disappearing would have been a rather strange plan. A missing person poster has since been made of Bernard. The poster details some aspects with the addition of a $20,000 reward. It's further addressed that Bernard was last seen on SkyTrain and Bus 340 going toward North Delta or Surrey, and was last seen at about 11 p.m. on the day he vanished. Anyone who may have sighted the missing man is also encouraged to contact 604-725-0057. RCMP's missing person reference for Bernard is 2171576. The disappearance of the beloved Bernard Grempel remains unsolved to this day, with not many leads to follow. He's described as being 6 feet tall and weighing 160 pounds. He's also sometimes referred to as Bernie. He has brown eyes and curly brown hair, and on the day that he was last spotted, he wore a white hoodie with red sweatpants and also wore black and white Nike shoes. Georgina Garsala was born in 1987 in Brighton, Sussex, and was one of 4 children to Andrea and Gassam Garsala. After she was born, the family moved to Libya, where they remained until 1998. They returned to the UK and settled in Worthing, where Georgina would find a job caring for elderly nuns. By the time she reached the age of 31 in 2018, she was managing a small food company. Georgina was said to be an articulate and intelligent individual, but had suffered from some mental health problems. It was on the 7th of March in 2018 that Georgina, who was now a mother of 2, was last seen in Worthing, West Sussex. She was said to have been inside Clifton Food and Wine on Clifton Road. She's captured on the security camera entering the store and speaking with the cashier. She had left her mother's house at 9:30 that morning and told her that she was experiencing some mobile phone trouble and would be seeking advice from a local phone store. It was also stated that she would be meeting up with her father later that day. After Georgina had collected her phone, she would then arrange to meet Gassam, her father, but she never showed up at the arranged meeting place. The last known sighting of her had been inside the store on Clifton Road. The owner of the Clifton Food and Wine store would later detail that the woman was asking him for help with her phone, and he directed her to a phone store. There may have been a second sighting, which was not confirmed. This sighting claims that Georgina was seen around 4 that afternoon, walking down Chapel Road with another woman who's not been identified. Police are appealing to anyone who may have information on this unidentified woman to come forward. It was also said that Georgina had told her mother that she would be visiting a local club center, but didn't make it there. Her mobile phone would be tracked, but didn't show any use after 3 that morning. It had also left the network around 11:30, while she was still being connected to a local Worthing mast. The phone never connected to another network after this. Additionally, Georgina's bank cards and account were never used again. Her mother didn't initially become worried when her daughter didn't return later that day, because she knew what her lifestyle was like. She believed that Georgina may have gone to stay with her friends or even an ex-partner. It was not until the following week that her mother would grow concerned. When Georgina had failed to host her 2 children, which she had with an ex-partner, he phoned Andrea stating that he'd not heard from Georgina for a couple days and had become worried. Andrea would then go on to spend the next couple of days trying to contact Georgina, but was unsuccessful. On the 17th of March, she finally contacted the Sussex police and reported her daughter missing. in August of 2019, her case would be treated as a homicide investigation. Crime Stoppers would offer a £20,000 reward to anyone who could offer information, leading to the discovery of Georgina's whereabouts. A Facebook page has also been dedicated to finding the missing mother, which is named Missing Person Georgina Garsala. She's described as being a height of 5 foot 4 inches and has shoulder-length dark hair, which is often worn in a bun or a top knot. Additionally, she has a piercing above the left side of her lip, and she can speak both English and Arabic. Detective Superintendent Andy Wolstenholme, who's leading the investigation of Georgina's disappearance, stated that they're all committed to finding this missing woman, as they had been on the day that they found out that she'd initially gone missing. It's since been 5 years since Georgina has gone missing. The detective superintendent expressed that 5 years is a long time for someone to be missing. He believes that people who may have information on what happened to Georgina may be ready to speak about it now. If this is the case, the detective ensures that they're ready to hear from anyone who may know anything. He further explained that they'll listen to any information these individuals may bring and follow up with any inquiries. If anyone has any information relating to this case, you're encouraged to report it online to the authorities by calling 101 or quoting Operation Pavo. Additionally, information can be passed on anonymously through Crime Stoppers at 0800-555-111 or the Crime Stoppers website. Both of these options are available 24/7. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.